Welcome to this Omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places, which is a positively inclined Doctor Who commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, challenge a friend to choose a story and their favourite things about each episode. I then watch and commentate along and try to guess what those favourite things might be.
Hello, I'm Martin Geraghty and I'm one of the long-standing artists on the Doctor Who magazine comic strip, and more recently a member of the animation team on the Missing Episodes productions. Toby has very kindly asked me to contribute to his podcast, and the story I've chosen is The Horror of Fang from 1977, which is one of those base under siege stories that Doctor Who does so well. And it's very probably my most rewatched Doctor Who story, to be honest.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to this edition of Happy Times and Places, in which we all go down to the lighthouse to see where these 4 episodes of Doctor Who guide us. Martin Geraghty is our special guest. By a lovely coincidence, Doctor Who seems to enter into my life in all sorts of funny ways. And Martin actually doesn't, Martin, who is the sort of creative hub of a lot of the animations that have been bringing Doctor Who missing episodes to life, and he lives only down the road from me. I've actually visited him at home to do a little bit of shooting for a little making of that we did for the Faceless Ones DVD to get some insight into his creative process, because he and Marie Walsh, who's the producer of a lot of the animations, and I all live in a sort of little triangle here in Manchester, just by a sort of strange and wonderful coincidence. I didn't know Anne-Marie lived here until I'd just done some work on Power of the Daleks, and then I was doing my gig on a Tuesday night. I think I must have mentioned Doctor Who on stage, and this lovely lady came up and said, "Oh, you mentioned Doctor Who?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Oh, I've just worked on an animation for a thing called Power of the Daleks." I said, "Oh, I've just done some voice work for that," and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, so, and her and Martin came over here when we did the commentary for Sharda, which we did at the kitchen table not far away from where I'm sitting now. So Doctor Who all seems to sort of coalesce around me. I'm sure we all feel like that, because it's such a phenomenon, isn't it, that there's somebody who you always know somebody who knows somebody that has some sort of involvement. But it's nice when you feel at the centre of something that's important to you, even though you're not really. So, Horror of Fang Rock. I don't live next door to anybody who involved in it, but I have encountered some of its key creative contributors, as we will discover as we go through these 4, I think, marvellous episodes of Doctor Who. I think this one's going to be fairly straightforward for me to do. So, I'm on the BritBox. And I will just tell the robot lady to turn the volume down, but I'll cut that bit out so it doesn't do it for you at home. Alexa, volume 4. So, let us press play on Horror of Fang Rock in 3, 2, 1. I did have to check then. It's one of those blind spots I have. I know it's Horror of Fang Rock, but I thought for a second, is there a the? But there's no, it's not the Horror of Fang Rock. It's just, there's no the. It's one of the few Doctor Who stories. Oh, well, no, is it? I'm just thinking, Nightmare of Eden, Terror of the Zygons. But anyway, let's not get into how many Doctor Who stories have the as part of the title. Lovely, basic, simple model shot. Isn't it a super idea to set a Doctor Who story in a lighthouse? I mean, and not just to have that as the setting, but to have, the light and the electricity as a sort of thematic part of the story, which then bleeds into the characters, which also feeds into the modus operandi of the evil creature itself. All very, very artfully done by Terence Dicks, a name obviously we're very used to seeing on the spines of books, but he didn't write that many TV scripts. Yes, we know he rewrote and script edited a lot and all of that, but actually as a writer of stories, not so many, and I still regret not using him as one of my 5 favourite things when we did the 5 Doctors, which was very daft of me. So I suspect I will be choosing Terence Dicks sooner rather than later, not just because this is a marvellous script. I've already mentioned the thematic stuff, but it's full of well-drawn characters. It's got some very, very witty lines. We know how funny Robert Holmes is. I think we sometimes forget how funny Terence Dicks is. But he totally understands what to do. And this is a funny one because it's not a Philip Hinchcliffe story, although it does feel a bit like it is. It's a sort of stylistic hangover from the previous era. And it was one of the first Target books I got myself. I had some book tokens, and it was one of the few ones that we hadn't got in the Castle bookshop. And there's a brilliant Jeff Cummings picture of Tom Baker, and it looks like he's got a sort of birthmark or something on his face, or a scar, but it's not. It's just because he's copied it very, very well from this photograph, and the shadowing on Tom Baker's cheek makes for a sort of prominent mark that I always think slightly strange looking, but it's just a quirk of sort of lighting and shadow. So here we have Ralph Watson and Colin Douglas. Colin Douglas, Donald Bruce from Enemy of the World. In his second Doctor Who story, I believe Paddy Russell basically phoned him up and said, "I've got a really hard, impossible part. Come and help me." And Douglas had not enjoyed or had not thought much of Enemy of the World. I seem to recall Deborah Watling saying that he spent the whole thing sort of going, "This is a load of old rubbish." But I'm not sure that was the case here. Everyone sort of seemed to like him on here. And Ralph, who's playing Ben, who in the book I think is a much bigger, burlier guy, a slightly different sort of character. Ralph knew Colin because I think they'd done a play together for about a year, something about miners, I think. And Ralph said that Colin always referred to his wife as the gin bucket, and Colin was a landlord. He had some flats in London, and a friend of mine recently shared digs with his son, but I didn't get any good stories because it was a sort of, this bloke I stayed with in Edinburgh, his dad was in Doctor Who. Anyway, he does a great job with what is a potentially quite a cliched part, but he's a consummate. He knows the business. Colin Douglas, he knows exactly what he's doing. Ralph Watson, I had the pleasure of watching Enemy of the World with Ralph Watson because Enemy and Webb, of course, came back together, and Ralph Watson is in the Web of Fear as Captain Knight. His parts get sort of smaller and smaller as his association with Doctor Who goes on, really, Ralph Watson. Well, I mean, he has a tiny little turn in The Underwater Menace. Wasn't even credited in cast list for that for many, many years, but he does get a credit on episode 4. He's a face on a screen, an overseer. But then he's Captain Knight, and he's also Etis in The Monster of Peladon, and then he's Ben in this, where he doesn't even make it past episode 1. Lovely film stuff here. Leela looks fabulous. Louise Jameson looks fabulous in this outfit. I love that coat of Tom Baker's. Lovely atmosphere of the sea noise. There's something so powerful about the inky blackness and the sheer power. I mean, I remember at quite a strange time in my life when I was touring my set, my Doctor Who scarf, just sitting on the coast at Lytham St Anne's and the sea crashing, and I had quite a sort of profound sort of experience of being considering the elements and feeling. I can understand why people feel sort of invigorated when they do sea walks, because the sheer force of nature is kind of bleeding into you, but also it brings and you're dwarfed by it. You are nothing compared to the ocean, and but it also brings with it, as well as the sheer force that it has, unknowable depths and, perishing lethal cold and all sorts. John Abbott as Vince, absolutely wonderful performance. Potential to not be a great character, I think, because he's young and because he's naive, but he's so likable. And he does the innocence without it being cloying or annoying. In fact, I think Ralph Watson, I knew Ralph a little bit, and he was a very nice man. And his story about being descended from a family of men, all of whom survived World War One, and how emotional that made him when he recalled the shame of, I think it was his grandmother, as the only woman in the village who hadn't suffered a casualty, and what that brought with it. I witnessed him tell that story a couple of times, found it desperately moving, and he was quite an emotional man. Ralph, he was a real sort of working class. Sort of working class hero. He was very aware of his working class history and the terrible things the miners had gone through, that he knew that generation of men and of people who knew real poverty and real hardship, and he was very conscious of that, and actually he got quite emotional about it, which made him a fascinating conversationalist. I actually think this is his weakest performance in Doctor Who. It's a bit shrill, it's a bit what you do, I'm a bit, I don't know, I just think, expecting a sort of burly, gruff kind of Ben from the book. It's no disrespect to Ralph, who I think's great, but I don't think it's his best performance. But this is great, isn't it? The mist means you don't have to see what's the coast in the distance. Although they have keyed that in the earlier scenes, they've keyed the view from the gallery, as it were, in very well. It's a very simple and effective production, and Terrence Dicks has given Reuben all that sort of I believe in all this sort of stuff, and it is quite cliched, but it's absolutely fine for this sort of thing. And when you've got good actors like Colin Douglas who know exactly how to pitch these sorts of characters, it's fine. I'm not a technician, that's very nice. And of course we're in Birmingham doing this. Yes, of course Horror of Fang Rock is good. It was made in Birmingham. And I think the Doctor and Leela are marvellous in this, even though Tom Baker and Louise Jameson were not best of friends on this. I think that's well documented. And Tom did not get on particularly well with Paddy Russell, the director, because I think Tom was in a combative mood and Paddy didn't take no nonsense, and that was not a good that was not a good mix. But it does mean we have a rather sort of maudlin, spiky Doctor. Although I like the way he shows respect to Vince. I like the fact they both. That's really nice, actually. They both sort of show Vince respect more, but because the mores of the society that means everybody else sort of patronises him and treats him like, because he's young and working class. But the Doctor and Leela don't read either of those things, so they just treat Vince with respect in a way that actually pretty much nobody else does. He's either patronised or treated, with as though he is a class inferior. And this is beautifully seeded in. Oh, we've brought up Ben. Oh no, we didn't see him. He's not there. No, we'd have seen him if he stepped out. Hang on. There's something wrong. Oh yeah, Mr. See, he calls him Mr. Hawkins. Adelaide later, doesn't she, calls him Hawkins, and Leela calls him Vince. And that's just so economical. But that says something about everybody in the way that they relate to Vince. And I love all this stuff of those, those big thick woolen jumpers. They were a thing. They were a thing that people had. Sort of multi-purpose sort of work jumpers, particularly associated with the sea. And I find that sort of comforting as a visual and as a. Well, I can just imagine what it was like. Oh, is this where she starts to just take her clothes off? I think that's brilliant. I'm no lady. I think that's terrific. And his reaction is absolutely delightful. See, even though the story is, unfolding very gently, we don't see any other characters after, until the ship's crashed at the end of the episode, until the next episode. But you've got the disappearing Ben, the crackly thing, the thing that we know has fallen and is watching the lighthouse and the green light, and that's just a great shot, isn't it? It's just Tom Baker silhouetted in the door. But you've also got these wonderful dynamics that you need. I hadn't really thought of this as a base under siege, but of course it is. It's totally what it is. That's it to its core. And this particular base has a thing of the week. I did Fury from the Deep very recently. That was the gas base. You've got the London Underground base of the Web of Fear. Got the ice base of the Ice Warriors, and this one is the brand new electricity base, because the characters are getting used to electricity, and Ruben doesn't trust it. I always find trouble. I like the way he treats it as a kind of there's a sort of cynical, dark, a sardonic resignation. That's not to undermine what's happened. It's deadly serious, this, but he's not not going to drench it in sentimentality. It's this is the Doctor kind of he doesn't like all of this death, but he's not gonna greet it like we do, and that makes it really interesting. But also, it doesn't mean he's being glib or unkind about it. It's because he has this wonderful, lofty Olympian detachment, and he's taken that hat off the wall and has a different hat on this week, which I also adore. And Leela's got changed and looks great with the jumper, and she's so good. They're such a good team. Although the Doctor is daft, he risks getting knifed. And so we have the geography of it, so because it takes place in such a small space. Got the boiler room, the coal hole, the gallery up top, and the room in the middle. Oh, and yeah. But it means and Ben's lantern has been crushed, which suggests that whatever killed him was pretty powerful. And Colin Douglas is doing this so very well. He was still going when I was watching telly. He was in GBH, the Alan Bleasdale series, although he died by the time it was repeated not that long after, and I believe had a bit of a hard time on it, and I think it sort of knocked the wind out of his sails on his final job, which is a shame because it's a nice part that he had, but I don't believe it was the happiest experience for him, which is a shame because he was an actor of great experience and great solid dependability, good proper character actor, and he gives Ruben is the old one full of foreboding and old wives' tales, but he's got the way that he treats Vince, he does with a certain sort of gentle. He's firm but fair, but he also gives him a sort of gentleness. Although he also does, he treats him with a gentleness and tries to reassure him, but also says, "But I'm not going to spare you the old supernatural tales." And we never quite get to the bottom of what the Beast of Fang Rock is. So Terence has his cake and then sort of forgets that we've eaten it with the Beast of Fang Rock, because there's no sort of and something crashed here hundreds of years ago. It's just like that load of old nonsense just happens to be a happy coincidence for the telling of this particular story. And I like the Doctor's line of, but the you know how to operate it. The Doctor sort of slightly go, you sour old puss. Yeah, see, all of this is loaded with stuff. The Doctor is sort of amused by Ruben's sort of predictable small-mindedness in terms of he thinks that Leela is a foreigner, and they're having, and it's great because these, as we know, Tom and Louise weren't getting on, but they have they are bonded here by their sort of detached amusement from Ruben. Although again, Douglas does it with enough sort of dignity that you kind of see where he's coming from. You know, he wants to do things proper, and he's a man of God and all that sort of thing. And they're not being too cruel to him. But the Doctor, you know, the Doctor does have that line, doesn't he, about what was he like before gas? He was probably saying there's nothing better than a good old fashioned candle. You know, Ruben is one of those people that will reject anything that is new almost for the sake of cantankerousness, and we all know people like that too. Will find fault in everything, and when you point out the fault in their thing, they'll go, "Oh yeah, but probably this anyway." So it's really nice characterization. Although Ruben is a type that Dix is clever enough to know how to deploy what he does and how people react to him in a way that is, hugely entertaining. Whilst, we're building up the tension of what the hell is going on in this lighthouse, and there's an explanation, isn't there, for the fog as well, which is brilliant because it means you have that beautiful atmospheric sort of surrounding. And the fog, I was so scared of the film The Fog when I was a boy, and that's got a lighthouse in it as well, and that was the most terrifying thing as a young boy. And I remember at about 1 o'clock in the morning, a policeman once knocked on our window with a torch, and it was foggy, and it was like Blake from The Fog, because I think he'd got my brother's passport or something that they'd had for some reason. So he thought on his way past he'd drop it off, and you just go. I was up late, but I did stay up late watching movies and stuff like that. But it's a good job I was a strong-hearted youth, because it was a bit terrifying. I remember my mum being not impressed at a policeman knocking on our window on a foggy night, shining a torch through it at 1 o'clock in the morning. Those things happen when you live in the country. So only one little bit of filming for this story, and it's this stuff. And it's very effective. It's a very well rendered set, which would look probably a bit pony on videotape, because you'd be able to see that it's not really rocks. It's dressed frames or whatever it is. Is it maybe a bit of carved polystyrene or whatever? But it looks like rock because film is beautiful. Dead fish, they could look a bit less plastic, but any holes picked in this story will be very minor, because I think it's a pretty much perfect Doctor Who story for me. Horror of Fang Rock. I think all of the ingredients that I like about good Doctor Who: scary, funny, intelligent, good, well characterized, well directed, simple, brilliantly simple, well acted. It's got all of it. It's got all of that. And I'm a sucker for you're watching something with characters that you get to know and like, and they get sort of picked off one by one, And Tom Baker has a wonderful brooding quality that is perfect for this kind of story, particularly when he's in this mood. And John Abbott, I think, is older than the character that he's playing. He said he always played rather younger than he was. I think he's 32 or something in this. I've never had the pleasure, actually. which is a shame because I do like it as a performance. I think he retired from acting after he'd done 4 Weddings and a Funeral, in which he's a clergyman at the end who catches Hugh Grant swearing a lot, I think. But I think it's a superb performance. I think he's lovely as Vince. I got very annoyed by the DVD menu of this, which basically shows everyone getting killed. The whole thing about a story like this is what's going to happen to my favourite character, or is my least favourite character going to get their just desserts in a thematically appropriate manner or whatever. And if you didn't know the story and you put the disc in, by the time you'd had the gumption to press play all, you'd know pretty much what happened to everybody. And I think those sorts of things, when they happen, you go, do people not think for a second? And in the great scheme of things, it's not terribly important. So, of course, I get absolutely livid about it. Anyway, but that's a nice little touch. It doesn't come across quite as well in the story because we don't see any of it. But the idea that the dead is walking and all of that, and it's because it's dragged Ben off, hasn't it, to do a sort of post-mortem so that it can understand how we work, which is a lovely, lovely idea. Which doesn't quite come across as well as it might, I think, in this. But it's a lovely idea in the script, the sort of, and of course, because we're set slightly in the past, everyone can afford to be a little bit superstitious. I remember this being a thing that when I first saw it, because every Doctor Who story has to have something that's a little bit disappointing. And this is not the best model in the world, which means that this cliffhanger is a little bit substandard because, well, we don't really know what's going on the boat anyway, and it's clearly an FX boat. But the mixture of the sound, the way that the cliffhanger is composed in that sense, and the light and the Doctor firing the flare and the sound and the horn, that is all really nicely done. It's just a shame it's not the best model in the world. I'd forgotten that. I was coming into this going, it's Horror of Fang Rock. It's simply one of the best Doctor Who stories ever. I know the monster's a bit naff at the end, but other than that, I'd forgotten. Yes, there's not a great model shot of the boat. However, this is going to be John Walker. Oh, he was an assistant cameraman on the Abominable Snowmen, so I've had the pleasure of zooming with him relatively recently. Paul Allen designed The Seeds of Death, I think he is no longer with us, and Spearhead from Space. And Paddy, I have some stories I can tell you about Paddy. I have various bits and bobs of hers upstairs because her brother let me have all of her telly files. She hadn't kept much, and most of it was stuff that she'd put together after the event. But anyway, yes, so there's been Paddy's cat litter tray is upstairs. I'm sure I probably mentioned that during Pyramids of Mars, but what a terrific director. And twice gets great performances out of Tom Baker, whether he and okay, it might have meant that he was pissed off or she was pissed off, but it doesn't matter. The end result is what is endured. I've got my favourite thing, I think, has got to be that it's a Terrance Dicks script. Terrance Dicks, I think, is a name we take so for granted because it's on the side of books and because we really know he was an excellent script editor who had a great relationship with his producer Barry Letts, and aside from that, he's Terrance Dicks. He's Uncle Terrance. He's all monsters are green, and just a wonderful, ubiquitous presence at conventions, who said what he thought. John Nathan Turner couldn't sell whelks. But who was also very kind and very game and obviously very fond of Doctor Who, and very humble about his own contribution. It was all, we just wanted to get the test card. We just wanted to make sure the test card wasn't shown. A legend. But he's not just a legend because of what he became after he left, working on the program and the Terrance that we all know and love. This was a guy who could have a script about vampires that he was going to be doing, and be told, no, do something else, set it in a lighthouse, do it by yesterday, and can come up with this, which is economical, which is funny, which is scary, which, as I say, not only is it, yeah, all right, it's a base under siege, but there's thought gone into it in terms of set it in a lighthouse. What's a lighthouse? Electricity. Well, let's set it at a time when electricity is new, because electricity is actually dangerous. Well, what about having a monster that electrocutes people as well then? And actually, let's think of a way that, as we will see later, that the light of the lighthouse can be the source of the victory. Oh, but how would I do that? Well, I'd concentrate a light with diamonds. Well, why would I have diamonds? Oh, well, let's create these characters. I mean, if he did write it very quickly, what a brain he has to piece all of that stuff together so it all fits. Everything is apt. All of the characters are very nicely written. They're all gifts for actors. And there's beautiful moments, the dragging of the corpse, the post-mortem, the fact that fog is generated and cold is generated in order for the creature to prosper camouflage itself in the environment. All of that is sober, and there's some brilliant lines, as we will see. Leela's one about, I will cut out your heart, gentlemen. This lighthouse is under attack, and by morning we might all be dead. Anyone interested? I mean, the cliffhanger to episode 3 is beautifully written. So my thing for episode 1, because it might be that Martin chooses this later, but I will have it in the bank, so I will get the points. I'm choosing the fact that this is a Terence Dicks script. What is Martin choosing?
So, to begin with, here is my favourite part of episode 1. More so than the inspired setting of a lighthouse for the action, to set the action in, there's a brief but brilliant textbook example of show don't tell halfway through the episode from writer Terence Dicks, where the Doctor, in a wonderfully moody turn from Tom, responds to Leela's suggestion that they hunt the unknown killer by simply tapping the mangled brass oil lamp they've found and saying, I don't fancy playing tag in the fog with something that can do that. As an exercise in economical scripting and setting an 8-year-old's imagination racing, it's pretty difficult to beat. In one sentence, he absolutely nails the threat that everyone is facing on the island. And it's brilliantly done.
Well, yes. I mean, I'll leave that out there for you to say whether I get a point for that. I mean, I was being more general, but that's partially because I feel guilt at not choosing Terence for the 5 Doctors, who's staring me in the face. I chose the Castellan, for God's sake, not Terence Dicks. What an idiot! Somebody else should be doing this. What Martin used was an example of Terence at his very, very best. But I didn't choose that particular moment, and I didn't even cite that moment in my justification for choosing Terence in his script. But that is an excellent moment, and just isn't that brilliant? He'll go down, he'll have an oil lamp with him. How can I use that prop now to help to add to the menace, tell the story, give our characters something to talk, well, let's just have it crushed. There we go. That tells you so much. As Marty says, it's very much a show don't tell. It's brilliant and economical. It's the economics of it. It's when I was rewatching a lot of Russell T Davies stuff during the pandemic, it's the fact that he can say so much in a line, 2 or 3 lines. And when I've written scripts, you go, that scene, I've re-emphasized that over and over again in order that the audience don't miss the point. And and that's why this scene is 3 pages long, and it takes a better writer than me to be able to go cut through all of that and say that in 3 lines. That's the elegance, that's the beauty, that's the skill, the economy, and to trust the audience and to let the actors fill in the blanks as well with their sense of foreboding, with their fear, and with their moody, what does Martin said, a terrifically moody turn from Tom Baker, and it really is. You're not writing prose, you're writing something where the actors and the director and the situation can fill in the blanks. And Terence Dicks knew that. My God, he knew it. So, do I get a point for that? It's up to you. It's up to you, people. I hope you're enjoying Horror of Fang Rock as much as I am. I will continue to eulogize the story because it's one. I watched this for pleasure. I was going to say recently. It was actually last Christmas when I had a couple of weeks off doing podcasting and all sorts of other things. And this was one of the stories. I knew I'd got it coming up for with Martin with Happy Times and Places, but I wanted to watch a story for pleasure, and I watched this for pleasure. And I almost feel like watching it for pleasure, having just watched it and talked through it, because I think there's so much to savour and enjoy, and even the sort of boring, tedious scene setting, character establishment stuff is all done with such elegance, such economy, such wit. Oh, he was a witty man, and it's that sets Doctor Who aside often from so many programmes, and it's making the wit complement the action, not be sort of askance at the very programme it is in, not breaking the fourth wall, not being a moment where the act's having fun. It's a mordant wit that springs from the situation, and that is given to us by the fact that the Doctor has this sort of lofty Olympian detachment where he can be sort of sardonic and playful, but without the other characters losing their dignity. Because everyone, I think, even though everyone, has moments in this where they're set up to be sort of laughed at, they're still true to themselves because of the writing and because of the playing. I think it's really brilliantly done. It's a story that sums up everything I sort of love about Doctor Who, and will be a story I will always go back to. And I'm going to thoroughly enjoy watching and hopefully conveying my enthusiasm to you. It shines like a beacon. Well, welcome back, everybody. That voice that you heard at the beginning was Martin Geraghty, as he said, whose name has appeared, and indeed whose art has appeared in the pages of Doctor Who magazine and on your TV screens if you have seen most of the Doctor Who missing episodes animations. So he's a multi-talented fellow. He lives not very far from here in the strange way that Doctor Who seems to converge on me at the strangest of coincidental times. I'm sure we all feel like that. I'm not saying I'm particularly special, but what I mean is it's odd how, I don't know, I seem to find myself adjacent to Doctor Who people just at times when I then end up working with them, and the adjacentness often has very little to do with it. It's very odd. Martin also lent me his copy of Tomato Cane by Nigel Neal, first edition, which has caused me great terror, because I'm sure I said to him, please don't lend it to me. I'm frightened of losing it. And he lent it to me at the Guinness Book of Records celebration of Doctor Who magazine, which was in London, and he gave it to me in a plastic bag, and I'm like, I've now got to move around London and get a train back to Manchester, and I've woken up a couple of times in the night and gone, where's that book, because I've moved house a couple of times since, and it would just be, and then I've got, found it, but I mean literally got up at 3:00 in the morning to scour the house and go, where did I keep it? And now the book has been re-released. The first edition is still worth an awful lot, but I have a re-released copy for practical usage now. So very high on my to-do list is to give Martin this cursed but very generously lent book back. So that's one or two fewer sleepless nights I can have over the next few decades, because I'm prone to, as I say, at 4:00 in the morning suddenly remember something that, oh my God, where is it? Anyway, the Horror of Fang Rock. No definite article. Horror of Fang Rock. I have on DVD, but I don't even need to go and get it or check that it's there. It is there because I also have it on BritBox, which tells me that I have 23 minutes remaining. I think it's because it started at the end of my last go. So I'm going to watch from the beginning. But however you choose to watch it, I hope that waffle has given you time as we press watch from the beginning, or play, or select, or whatever you want to press on the second episode, which I hope won't find us on the rocks of the horror. No, not the horror, just horror of Fang Rock. I was racking my brains when watching the first episode, going, why wasn't this always a 10 out of 10 for me? It definitely is now, and it's always been a book I'd had great affection for. So there must have been a time in between sort of getting used to these pictures and reading the book where I saw it for the first couple of times and found disappointments within it. And I seem to recall, there was always this, the model work was an issue, and the monster's not fantastic, and there's a bit of chitter chatter between Doctor and monster when everything sort of pauses in the final episode. But I forgive it all of those things now, because I just think there is so much high quality going on as well. And isn't just Tom Baker, and aren't the photos of that, aren't they? Because Colin Douglas is the main guest star. I'm sure there's publicity photos of Tom with Colin Douglas on the on the viewing gallery part of the lighthouse, and it's a great image. Tom Baker staring out from a fog-bound lighthouse. Such a sort of it's a fairly straightforward, simple set, but it's a great setting, and they've done well to suggest that we're outside, even though this is an entirely studio-bound story with a couple of days filming, but also in a studio interior. So I think they do a fantastic job. Yeah, that boat's not great, and there's clearly nobody on it, even though they've dubbed a few screams and bits of dialogue on it. And I remember, because I'd got this, I think, as an edited compilation from Super Channel, and I'd also got another version that had the closing credits. When I sort of copied my version together from the two sources I'd got it from, I didn't want a version with no credits, and the Flare was a very useful guide to enable me to edit the cliffhanger in, because it was sort of moving across the sky, and I know I tried it a couple of times and that flare jumped, and I knew I'd got it right when it was perfect, even though there's a change in quality from colour to sort of almost black and white, but I wanted the credits, because especially as things happen with the credits, particularly episode 4 of Horror of Fang Rock. Well, only episode 4, actually, but we'll get to that when I get to episode 4. But I didn't want episode 4's credits to be the only credits I had. One, because I like watching in episodes, and I like the cliffhangers, and I like the credits. But also because episode 4's are atypical. Brilliant acting there from Louise Jameson, who shows that she's quite enjoying doing this novel thing of making the foghorn sound. I'd forgotten that there's a bit of film work with Colin Douglas and John Abbott here in the film studio stuff. I think I just got it in my head that it was Tom Baker and Louise Jason. Colin Douglas reiterating the subtext there that but that's brilliant. But of course, that helps the Doctor, because Colin Douglas is going, cursed electricity wouldn't happen with oil, and the Doctor's going, no, it wouldn't, and this is a monster that has some connection with electricity, which is because this story is very cleverly written. Louise Jameson does lovely little touches that you need actors to do in this multi-camera world, because sometimes they have to get from A to B, or it's largely movement, but occasionally bridging a scene or whatever. And if you keep acting, now there's what looks like a sort of radioactive pea that's with sort of tendrils with snot hanging off it. It's not the most successful creature, the Rutan, but it's largely half glimpsed or miles away, so it's okay. And as I say, I think it probably affected my enjoyment when I first saw this, as I have to be honest, most Doctor Who stories that I'd read first as Target books took some getting used to when the movies I'd imagined in my head were studio-bound videotaped drama. But of course now, where I'm so used to this stuff and less self-conscious about it, I'm able to see, reality in what is, I think, to a modern viewer, probably obviously artificial. And I would get annoyed with my past self. This is all beautiful. So we've had the lovely, great stuff in episode 1 where Doctor Who calls Vince Mr. Hawkins and Leela calls him Vince, and he says to Adelaide, I'm Vince Mum, Vince Hawkins, and she says, thank you, Hawkins. She's being nice, she thinks, but that automatically says to us, oh my God, these people are awful. And Colin Douglas looks like he's sort of waiting to come on then, which he also does in Enemy of the World. There's a scene in Enemy of the World where you can see him as Donald Bruce in, I think, episode 2, waiting. So I think we can accept that one because it could be, oh, he stopped and he's eavesdropping. And in fact, I do read it like that. And yeah, I do read it that he's eavesdropping and then he comes in. I don't think it's a miscue. I love that brilliant piece of acting that you've got there, that you've got Tom Baker's Doctor grinning at the ridiculous superstition and Leela taking it absolutely seriously. It's brilliant. Considering these two weren't getting on at this point, their characters are simpatico or not, or they're working at odds with each other, but deliberately so. It's good business from the actors, but it's not antagonistic. It's the Doctor going, silly old goat, and Leela going, oh, this wise old man has the key to the mysteries. Beautiful. And now that's the famous scene where Tom Baker rushes through the door, and so Paddy Russell holds the camera on Louise Jameson because she wanted him to stay at the door. Adelaide doesn't approve of the Doctor because he puts his feet up. He's so insolent. I like that because he doesn't like them because he knows that somebody on the ship was being a fool. No, but I'm full of ideas. Tom Baker is at the height of his powers in this. And again, I love that he's polite to, he's not just insolent because he's a brooding alien Time Lord. He accords Vince the respect that Vince deserves because he's a nice young man, but also, important to the running of the lighthouse. Whereas these interlopers from the planet Snob, and we get just the little bits of character dynamic we've got there. Skinsale doing his army stories, and Palmerdale showing that he doesn't like him. The wet gentleman is Lord Palmerdale is a brilliant line. And I love the character of Skinsale because we like him. He's quite heroic. He's dryly funny. But actually, he's deeply, deeply flawed. And it's only, it's well written that he's a character who's flawed. But Alan Rowe also makes him terribly likeable. But actually, if you examine what he is and what he does, he's awful. All these people are awful. And it's very clever writing. And I love that the Doctor goes, you want to get to London? You haven't got a chance. I think that's absolutely brilliant. The Doctor makes no pretense of hiding the fact that he thinks these people are god-awful. Interesting casting too. Sean Caffrey was an Irish actor playing the posh lord. He was in Galloping Galaxies and also Edge of Darkness. And Dara Carville, who writes The Bay on ITV, tried to put me in touch with Sean Caffrey when I was doing my Who's Round, but it turned out he was quite poorly, and then Dara got in touch and said actually he's died. So, but he was an actor that had he's got a nice part in Edge of Darkness. He's the one that kills one of the main characters in the first episode. And another Irish actor who I love here, Rio Fanning, who I did interview for Who's Round, didn't remember being in Doctor Who at all. But an interesting fellow, now sadly no longer with us. He was married to Karen Ford, who was in Grange Hill, and also wrote several episodes of EastEnders under the pseudonym Michael Robates. He also wrote under the name Rio Fanning, but then adopted a pen name to make his tax easier. And he's dragged in the body of Ben, which is important, which we have had seeded in episode 1. Do you think the beast ate him? I love that. But all of what the Rutan is doing is tying in with the idea of this terrible creature, which leads Leela to question in the way that she does. But of course, Doctor Who has a brilliant no. It's not a beast just being a beastly thing. It's doing a post-mortem, and that's a fantastic idea. That the creature is doing something that we understand as 20th, 21st century humans. It makes it all plausible. It gives it a reality, underlining the story of a lighthouse under siege from a glowing golf ball of doom. It gives Vince the idea that there's walking corpses, which then ties in with the superstition element of it, which gives it its atmosphere, even though we kind of know, no, ancient superstitious creatures are nonsense, but futuristic alien ones, they're perfectly plausible. It's this weird sort of duality we always have going on when we're watching Doctor Who, is that it's brilliant, this story, because you spend a lot of time going, well, no, obviously the nonsense old story that the old guy's banging on about is obviously ridiculous. The more sensible explanation is that there's a shape-shifting alien from the far future. I love all of this, hanging from the Yardard Hendriott's mutiny. Brilliant, sort of sardonic Colonel Skinsale. Harker I love as a character because he's often working class working class or regional characters in Doctor Who are often, can often be slightly arch, slightly overwritten, slightly patronising. Whereas Harker, again, we see the Doctor defer very much to Harker. Harker is really important because he's the practical seaman. I love Vince; he's so sweet. John Abbott is just so likeable, and I love the way that they treat his character. And I love the dynamic between the two of them, which really gives us the deep foreboding that the story needs. Well, this lot don't quite understand what's going on. Vince doesn't understand what's going on in a different way. He's scared of ghosts from the past, whereas these ones have got their mind on completely trivial things that, as it turns out, will lead to most of their downfalls, which is very interesting. Love all of this. And Tom Baker has such a brilliant intensity. And again, like he's been with Vince, sort of saying, Harker, yeah, you've got to get some rest. And Adelaide is wonderful. I love all of that. She doesn't approve of Leela, and Lord Palmerdale ribs her. The economy with which these characters are drawn, and they're all very well cast, is superb. And this, to me, is Doctor Who at its greatest. It goes, what are our assets? We can't do vast sets. Let's set it in a very small area where we just have a few good sets. We can't really show the monster, so let's have a shape-changing one that turns into people or is glimpsed from afar. What does that leave us with? Sort of atmosphere. What creates atmosphere? Well, spooky lines, really good actors. What do really good actors need? Characters that are well written. Okay, I'll write some good characters. I'll write some foreboding, spooky lines, and I'll write an anticipation and fear that, again, the actors kind of have to give us. What makes it Doctor Who? The fact that it's shot through with a sort of mordant wit, and the fact that we got two brilliant leads that we can have, spark off each other with all and give all of the sort of the nonsense, as it were, real depth and import, and drive it with a again, that foreboding that Tom Baker at his brooding best gives it, and Louise Jameson at her sort of absolute insistence on taking the situation seriously, even though she is a character with a sense of humour, so she can still keep it light. It's alchemy for me. It's TV gold. I love this story, and the costuming. I mean, she looks fantastic in that costume. And, it's just a jumper and a pair of leggings, but she looks practical and she looks of the period and she looks sexy. It's great. And Tom Baker just suits that lighter tweed, I think, and that fur lining on the jacket. And it doesn't look too bulky and heavy as he sometimes does. I mean, it's still a brilliant silhouette, but I think this is a particularly fine example of it. And music by Dudley Simpson, not going to do us any harm either. And this is great because, you feel the kind of danger of them going outside. And in fact, they've gone outside a lot more than I remember. I don't really think of, when I think of this story, I don't think of the scene of them with Vince and Reuben in the rocks, and I don't really think of this scene. I think more of obviously them being trapped in the lighthouse, but I think it's desperate and I think it's cunning. Cunning is a great word. It tells you everything you need to know, and look, and that's just. Yeah, we've got the green light and the trademark noise that we're starting to associate with the creature, with the beast. Again, it's economy, it's spooky. We barely say that is more successful than the long shot of the what looks like the Martian's eyeball being thwacked out, pulled out of its socket and dragged across a rocky terrain. And do you really believe that these characters know each other? And Alan Rowe Alan Rowe has been in the Moonbase as Dr. Evans, and he's a fool. I love all of this. I was a fool and a scoundrel. And clear, they've had some sort of arrangement, but Palmerdale's not going to be able to use Skinsale's information. We don't really know much of what all this is about, but I love that. I'm an officer and a gentleman. You're a jumped up little money grabber for all your title. It's beautiful stuff, and it speaks of sort of class and position and where different elements of it have different uses. And again, we don't like Palmerdale. He's a prick. But we do like Skinsale, and yet they're both dishonest. But it's because Alan Rowe has such sort of charm, and he's been Edward of Wessex in the Time Warrior, Dr. Evans in the Moonbase. Neither of them particularly brilliant parts, but he's a character actor par excellence, and also the partner of Geoffrey Bayldon, who has not yet been in Doctor Who, but said he was he was spoken to when they were casting it first time round, and obviously turns up as Organon in Creature from the Pit. And I had the pleasure of speaking to Geoffrey at his home, but Alan had died by then. And then Alan comes back in full circle as Gareth. So Alan does 4 Doctor Who's, which is a pretty good and hefty contribution, and all reasonable parts. But I think this is his best one, and he's brilliant in it. And Skinsale is one of my favourite Doctor Who characters, I think. I love this. Tom Baker, I think we're in terrible trouble. Do not be afraid, Doctor. This is so good that there's something about Tom Baker's, sonorous voice and classical acting presence where he can say, I think we're in terrible trouble. And it just resounds in a way that not all doctors, I think, can. And that's no disrespect to them. I love all the doctors, but I do think Tom Baker is so good at the sort of at setting the atmosphere and import. And Ria Fanning gets his lines out in slightly the wrong order here, but it doesn't really matter because he's acting that I've just woken up and I don't quite know where I am rather nicely. So I don't even know if that's a mistake. That might have been a mistake in rehearsal that they sort of kept because it keeps it real. And I like the fact that they don't make a fool of Harker here, and that but Palmerdale's so patronising, and Harker just goes, "Oh yeah, you want to get money, and it was all your fault that we." And we hear about the captain. So there were other people on that ship who didn't actually make it, which is pretty grim when you think about it. And I like the fact that Harker kind of goes, "Screw you, you're terrible," and the fact that the survivors from the boat all have their sort of problems with each other adds to the tense dynamic within the lighthouse, and that really helps. And I love this bit. "Gentlemen, I've got news for you. This lighthouse is under attack, and by morning we might all be dead." And then he grins. Anyone interested? I mean, only in Doctor Who, because it's not undermining the situation. It's not sending up the situation. It is still deadly serious, but it's a black, mordant humour that somehow Tom Baker can channel in a pitch-perfect way, so he can deliver it like a gag, but it doesn't send up the situation, and it doesn't puncture the atmosphere. What it does is it actually adds to it, because the Doctor is this crazy, unpredictable alien who unsettles these people and who deals with a dangerous situation with this sort of unpredictable humour that kind of adds to the gloom in a way. It makes the black, it makes it a sort of black sardonic fog, enveloping the story in the very language and the very performances that tell it. I think it's so good. Ruben is not really helping Vince here. Going, well, there were three, and two of them died and one went mad. So that's not great for us three guys. But actually, what happens here is that Ruben, having scared Vince, says, "I'll go and do the job that you were supposed to go and do because you're shaking and you're too scared to hold a shovel." But in so doing, that kills Ruben, because Ruben now is about to die, which he wouldn't have done had he stayed up and done the job he was supposed to do and sent Vince. Vince would have gone down and be killed. So he sort of, in scaring Vince, he has sort of saved his life, as it turns out. Not for long, but this silencer, I will cut out your heart. And the fact that the Doctor gives that little sort of grin, not of as though he doesn't really sort of approve of it, but he's quite amused that it's happened. So that's actually, this is the last we see of Ruben. Oh no, we see him seeing Ben's body, doesn't he? And the fact that Leela can pick up the fact that it's getting colder because she's Leela, because she's a creature of instinct and blah de blah and used to. So this is the last we see of Ruben, and it's actually quite sweet that what he does is he checks his boiler and he does his job, and that's a lovely bit of character acting business. But he sees Ben's corpse, doesn't he, and gives it the sign of the cross, which is him acknowledging his dead friend and doing the proper, the decent thing. But now he's going to get killed. We don't realise this till the end of the next episode. Well, I suppose we probably do, but this is another unusual episode ending. I don't think the scream is the most convincingly rendered in terms of the way that it's fed into the soundscape, which is a shame. But nonetheless, I still think it's a really interesting episode ending, unlike a typical Doctor Who episode ending, because it's a kind of it's not a moment of imminent danger for the Doctor and Leela, our two heroes, but it is it's a scream in the night. It's a hang on, is something inside the lighthouse. Somebody's gone, and these stories are all about who's going to get picked off next. Now, I don't think you'd expect it to be Ruben, because he's the kind of he's the senior lighthouse guy, But as we will see, it's not as straightforward as that, because suddenly we get elements now of, the Thing, before the Thing. And the Thing from Another World that it's based on doesn't quite have the shape changery thing to the extent that the Thing has, where this is a creature that can morph into the bodies, rather cheaply therefore, of the fine character actors that we have in the story. In fact, it doesn't disguise itself as it only actually disguises itself as Reuben, doesn't it? So yeah, they could have done more with that. You probably would now have a sort of few more is that really the person that we think it is? We only really get it with Reuben, and it's not, as we will discover, it's not they don't make a big secret of what's going on. They decide to, it's given away long before the brilliant cliffhanger for next week. But nonetheless, it's another dimension to the story that works and that helps to give it its atmosphere, and it gives us next week's cliffhanger, which we will talk about next time. But that is a brilliant and thrilling installment of Doctor Who. So last week I said it was, or last edition I said it was the Terence Dicks script with the economy. I mean, I could have said that this week as well, with the economy, the foreboding, the characters, the wit. I think this week it has to be. I just think they're on such tip-top form. The Doctor and Leela and the relationship between the two, the way they're written by Dicks, the way that their performances seem to gel when they need to, and to be at odds when they need to be. And the fact that we know that actually this is a time when Tom Baker wasn't being particularly nice to Louise Jameson, and yet they still manage to have a great bond between them. They do the dialogue back and forth very, very well, and him going, "We're in trouble," and her going, "Don't worry, we'll postcards, we'll be fine." I love it when Leela sort of reassures the Doctor when he's doing this sort of Doom Lady thing, not because he looks scared, but because that's what she does. That's her job. But also the humour, the fact that they're both acting at times that just gives the scenes an extra little something, like when Reuben's given his beast to Fang Rock stuff and the Doctor's smiling, "This is rubbish," and Leela's going, "Oh my God, this sounds terrible," and then he looks at her and realises that they're both coming from completely different places. His reaction to her, "Silence or I will cut out your heart," that line, "Silence or I will cut out your heart," is glorious. Tom Baker's "This lighthouse is under attack, and by morning we might all be dead. Anyone interested?" is a great line, and it's delivered absolutely perfectly, and then topped off with that dazzling grin. His performance is pitched perfectly of when to be funny, when to be doom laden, and when to be funny, but in a way that the funniness actually kind of helps with the tension rather than undermines it, and yet isn't glib. It's there to help stop the whole thing being too blooming gloomy, but it's still quite mordant and dark. There's a sort of, cynicism in the face of, abject horror, that just, again, I think is just pitch perfect. So for me, I mean, I love Tom Baker and Louise Jameson anyway. I love the Doctor and Leela anyway. But I think the alchemy between them, which, partially to do with the writing, and partially to do with the performance, and maybe partially to do with where they are with each other as actors, and maybe the fact that, throw Paddy Russell into the mix as well, who's not getting on with Tom Baker, admires Louise Jameson. So all of this stuff is all adding to whatever it is going on. But whatever it does not produce, because often, difficult things off screen reflect the on screen product. If anything, I don't know, it seems to help with this, because I think they're on wonderful form. Tom Baker is such a good actor. We forget that sometimes when, he was born to play Doctor Who. He's Tom Baker. He's, I was big in Abu Dhabi, and aunties love me, their titties tingle. You go, yeah, but I would also love to have seen your Titus Andronicus, or whatever. You've got dramatic heft. You've got real wit. You've got real presence. He is when he wants to be. Tom Baker is an actor as strong as any. He just also happens to have been born to play Doctor Who. He's so good. So I think Tom and Louise and their dynamic, the Fourth Doctor and Leela, and that sort of mordant dark wit, encapsulated by this lighthouse is under attack. But so many other things I could have chosen. I love all those characters. I love Skinsale. I love the economy with which their stories are all told. I love Harker. But they're all good, and they all get some brilliant lines. And there's some, the wet gentleman is Lord Farnhamdale. The wit with which Terence Dix peppers the dialogue of his characters, and again the economy with which all of that stuff is done, and the fact that it's a lighthouse under siege, and the atmosphere is creeping in, and the outside is getting scarier and scarier, and soon they're going to have to lock the doors, and they get more enclosed and more enclosed with a rampant beast walking around and picking them off. But no, Doctor and Leela, for all of those reasons I said. What has Martin Geraghty chosen?
Right, now episode 2. Episode 1, the cliffhanger to episode 1 ends with a thoroughly disreputable but wonderfully realised group of cads and hangers-on crashing into the story in another plot masterstroke by Terence. During his time as script editor on the Pertwee era, Dix often portrayed the Doctor as a kind of clubbable gent, usually on first-name terms with members of the establishment, like Lord Toby Rowlands, for example, although you don't really know if he's just if this is all bluster on the part of the Doctor, but it's certainly easy to believe that Pertwee goes and sits in wood-panelled gentlemen's dens drinking port of an evening. But obviously Tom's Fourth Doctor is a completely different kettle of fish, and Dix manages to invest a character with a barely disguised disdain for the recent castaways, although Tom's alleged bad temper throughout filming probably emphasises this even more. But the introduction of these wonderful characters is a great plot point, and just creates more tension and adds to the suspense surrounding the whole location and storyline.
So I like what he described there as barely disguised disdain. I did touch upon that, and it is a key element of the episode, and I love that. Yeah, you want to get to London? You've no chance. The fact that he's not only disdainful of them, he's sort of deliberately cruel in places, and it's that alien detachment which I love, where he sort of loftily presides over people having petty earthly squabbles. And the great thing about Doctor Who as a character and as a programme is it says all your little concerns, all the little hills you want to die on, all the little fiefdoms that you have that buff you up and say how important you are, or all the petty concerns that bother you too much that they make you selfish and avaricious and inquisitive. The Doctor is above all of that, because the Doctor has seen the whole of time and space from the beginning to the end and everything in between, and our petty little fiefdoms and concerns and squabbles are flea bitings, to him, gnats farts to him, but or them, because the Doctor sees the bigger picture, and so often the limits of humanity are shown when we as human beings fail to see the bigger picture, because we're too busy looking at our own tiny screen, or even worse, in our own mirror. And I love it when Doctor Who does that, because that is quite aspirational. That says rise above all the things that you think are important, most of which aren't. Now, in Doctor Who, it's usually because there's a marauding alien beastie out there who's going to chew your feet off. But the wider message is there's this whole universe of wonder out there as well as a universe of terror. So as well as you should have eyes on the big things that are scary and eat you up, you should also have eyes on the things that make you ascend beyond the sort of confines of your class status, as with these characters, or money, or whatever horrible deal that that Skinsale and Palmerdale have come up with. I love that sort of loftiness that the Doctor has when it is deployed properly, and Tom Baker has that sort of Olympian detachment, which is more appealing to me than. And I know sometimes it's satirised when Pertwee does it, and the Tubby Rowlands thing, could be seen as the Doctor actually taking advantage of that stuff and taking the piss out of it. But Pertwee is a bit more clubbable. He doesn't do the sort of lofty Olympian detachment thing that Baker does at his best, and that's why I think when Baker does it, it has an extra dimension, that the Doctor's eye is on something else, and that's a sort of darker version of the positive message that the show has about reaching for the stars, seeing beyond our confines. It could be all sort of used as a weapon against us as well, to sort of go, you are very limited if you allow yourselves to be, and that really helps with those character dynamics. I don't think I can get a point for that though, can I? I think I was close, but I don't think close but no cigar, which of course is what the Third Doctor would be smoking with Colonel Skinsale in the club, no doubt. I wonder if they probably knew each other. That's not to diss Pertwee, by the way. I've talked how brilliant Pertwee is and has different qualities. I'm just talking about in this particular area. I think it particularly suits Tom Baker's, maudlin godlikeness, if you can have such a thing, that very much puts us in our place. Russell T Davies, of course, has a slightly different spin on that when he goes, he celebrates the sort of the beans on toast elements of humanity, and that's another great thing as well, to sort of say, for all the highfalutin stuff, don't be ashamed of enjoying the little simple pleasures either, because the small beautiful things are what life is all about, as another Doc said. So it's all complicated, but I love it, and it's interesting, and it's that pull we have between the Doctor Who, which is a show about outer space and the universe, but often made with things you've got in your drawer, and it's the clash of those two things which can sometimes create a wonderful sort of ramshackle harmony, and sometimes can create a sort of thought-provoking dissonance, and both of those things are equally important. And I'm loving talking about Doctor Who in this way, all prompted by a story about just a group of people getting picked off by a monster in a lighthouse. But it's so much more than that. It's a really fine example of Doctor Who from one of its great exponents on the typewriter, and two of its finest regulars, with a flawless guest cast, brilliant director, great design. And it's also a period piece, which I love about it as well, because Doctor Who lends itself to that, and the BBC are very good in it. And, my God, it was made in Birmingham. What the devil was that? Sheer brilliance, that's what it was. Well, hello everybody. It's the thoroughly enjoyable... Spoiler alert, sorry, but if you've listened to the first two parts of this, you'll know that it's so far been the thoroughly enjoyable, and will continue to be the thoroughly enjoyable, horror of Fang Rock, episode 3. Its advocate, Martin Geraghty, who has worked on Doctor Who comic strips, Doctor Who animations, and also lent me his priceless copy of Nigel Neal's Tomato Cane. I'm fresh from doing a reading of a story, The Pond, from Tomato Cane, at the Manchester Festival of Fabulous Films, and also from launching the Season 2 box set in the form of The Time Meddler, and a little on-stage interview from me and others, Tyler Butterworth, Paul Venezes, Andrew Stocker, Peter Purvis, Pete McTighe. It was the first of the BFIs I went to, and it was really, really good fun and enjoyable, and a reminder of what a lovely bunch of people make up Doctor Who fandom. And I saw loads of people there, some of them just across the room, and some I got to speak to, people I hadn't spoken to in the flesh for a good 3 years or so, and I could have stayed there for a whole extra day. So it's with that in mind. Now, this is all topical for patrons because these virtually go live. Non-patrons, this happened about 6 months ago. Now, that's not to rub it in or anything like that. It's just to illustrate, because I always do at the end, and I know not everybody listens after the credits. This is to illustrate that patrons get these podcasts about 6 months early. So if you've done a marathon of these and are deciding, I've caught up, and you're not a patron and you're on iTunes or one of those, there's quite a hefty stack of episodes in Patronville, which is very cheap to access. But if you're a patron, I'm preaching to the converted, so I'm sorry about that. Right, listen up, everybody, patrons, non-patrons, I love you all, and it's nice to be doing this, isn't it? It's nice as I record this, the winter nights are drawing in, it's the day after Halloween. What more appropriate story than the Kill Fest that is, and a reminder, reminds me very much of the sort of horror films, all the late night horror films that I seem to remember from when I was a kid, with the John Carpenter ones, like The Thing and The Fog, which of course has part of it is set in a lighthouse with Adrienne Barbeau as a DJ, isn't she, in a lighthouse? So slightly different setup, but a foggy night and a lighthouse, and is enough to evoke that Carpenter classic. Which and they have the great thing of having a group of characters cut off, and who then get bits cut off. People get picked off, and that's my kind of thing, hoping that person survives, or upset that person doesn't. I mean, even non horror and sci-fi, like the Poseidon Adventure, I love all of that stuff. Throw a group of characters together, have them in jeopardy, pick them off one by one. You feel each individual death if it's done properly, and you're pleased for the survivors. At the end, that's all I need. I don't need plot twists and convolutedness and blah de blah. I mean, all that stuff's good, but that's bread and butter for me. So, then you throw in Paddy Russell, Terence Dix's writing, Tom Baker, Louise Jameson in this cast, and it's bread and butter with quite a lot of lovely jam and peanut butter and Coke. I'll leave you to decide which one. Let's say sprinkled, you'll know exactly which one. Right. Why did I say that as if I was somebody that's taken loads of Coke? Because I haven't. But did I come across like I was what? Who cares? Right. Stop talking about. This is a family podcast of a child-friendly television show in which loads of people are about to die. But crucially, not take drugs, because drugs are bad. So let's crack on with episode 3 of Horror of Fang Rock. I'm going to press watch from the beginning on BritBox. You may be watching on DVD. You won't be watching on Blu-ray at the time I record this. So 3, 2, 1. Right, I had a few false starts there, so sorry if... you won't notice. I'll hopefully have edited it brilliantly. And now I've drawn attention to it. So it could have been a seamless transition, but that's just... BritBox decided to behave slightly strangely. So here we are. I'm sure... I wonder if my brother and sister told me I watched this one. I have an inkling it was one I maybe should have watched when I was a kid, but I don't remember watching as a kid. I do remember The Invisible Enemy. So that's interesting, because I think of it as one that predates my watching experience, because I have no memory of watching it as a kid. And yet, the episode broadcast 2 weeks after this one. But it was the repeat of Invisible Enemy that was my earliest memory. But I've just had an inkling of my brothers going, "Oh no, you were around when we watched Horror of Fang Rock," but If I was, I don't remember it. Invisible Enemy is my earliest memory. And so I think of this one as being one from before my time, especially as I got the book so early in my book buying. But this is all good, and the characters all look great. As BBC can do costume drama, so all of that stuff they can do in their sleep. Although, of course, because this was Birmingham, I think there was a few members of the crew that it would be their first and only time working on the show. I think there was a sound guy was it Dave Bournemouth that Paul Venezes knew, who sadly no longer with us, who I think had done something on the Moon base when he'd been stationed in London, but largely worked in Birmingham, because Paul Venezes, who is, BBC producer, missing episode hunter extraordinaire, and BBC DVD commentary producer and stuff, lovely fella Paul. He knows all the Birmingham lot because he's based in Birmingham, and he always used to mention Dave Bournemouth because he did this, and I think it was I think a lot of the guys that Paul knew or knows have one Doctor Who connection, and it's Horror of Fang Rock, because this was done at Pebble Mill. I like the fact that all the class stuff is completely knocked out of the park now that this lighthouse is under attack, and by morning we might all be dead. I think Annette Woolett, whose name is now I think Lucy Maxwell. I've never had the pleasure, but she was one we couldn't find for a while. But then she turned up. She works for a charity, I think, in Swansea. But because I'd got Rio Fanning for Who's Round, here he is, lovely actor. Told terrible stories of going to a sort of Catholic school and getting discipline whacked into him on his bare hands. He'd never have gotten any of that. But he's in one of the first 3 episodes of Z-Cars. He's in one of the Z-Cars episodes that's on the VHS of Z-Cars that they did. I remember the Z-Cars cast were on Wogan to launch a VHS of the first 3 Z-Cars episodes. Primetime telly, venerable actors launching archive telly on VHS. You wouldn't get that now, would you? Maybe you would. I don't watch the one show very often, but even if they did, they laughed at it. I seem to recall they laughed at Web of Fear rather than treating with the reverence it deserved. But there we go. People who make modern factual television don't seem to be aware that the people that came before them paved the way for what they do now, and if you're doing the one show, probably don't laugh at a piece of children's drama that is endured for 60 years and people still remember and want to buy. Anyway, I'm preaching to the converted, and this is supposed to be positive. And I was talking about Rio Fanning, who's in one of the early episodes of Z-Cars. He popped up in a Sergeant Cork as well. He pops up in an awful lot. Now then, I suppose the Alan Rowe tries to make that work, and it doesn't quite, where he's supposed to look down first and then notice the guy behind him who's practically next to him. But that's okay. Because I love Colonel Skinsale. It's one of my favourite performances. I actually think, Annette Woolett, I think, has a hard job because she has to scream and lose it quite a lot. But it's a joke. It's in the text. It's in the character that actually they find her really annoying. And of course, and I know this. I play in the Jago and Lightfoot I was in, I played an annoying character, and people said, God, I found him really annoying. I was like, well, yeah, he was supposed to be annoying, but I can understand why you might go, oh, Toby's really annoying in that, but I'm not annoying. The character I was playing, I was annoying, and I wouldn't have done the right job if he hadn't been annoying. But it's a bit like, is it Jeremy Fitz-Oliver in the Pertwee Radios? He is really annoying though, and Adric's annoying, and Brendan's annoying, and I'm not sure annoying characters are particularly helpful to an actor. But actually, I think in the case of Adelaide, it's done very well because I think she plays her spot on, and the way that the others react is occasionally sardonic. Leela gets quite tired of her, but actually is quite gentle with her, and also Adelaide is scared but also patronising. It's clever. It works, and I think you have to give the actress credit, and also a certain amount of sympathy. Going, you're playing the awful one, so put your ego to one side. and she's not, and she doesn't take you out of the drama and make you go, God, I'm not enjoying watching this anymore, because she's been deliberately placed in it in that way. No, the issue, I guess, is we've just had, the Doctor saying, I think the creature killed Reuben, and Harker's going, no, I saw him. And you have Colin Douglas doing very well there, looking sort of slightly stunned and going, leave me be. Now, I don't think I ever watched this without knowing that it was a shape-changing alien. So it's very difficult for me to judge whether, because I love the cliffhanger to this episode, but is it a cliffhanger that works because... Does it work because it's just so well done and well acted and nicely written? I love the girls tied to him like a piece of string. And I love this scene because Skinsale, who has his own issues in terms of whether he's a good person or not, is kind of the one we're rooting for amongst this bunch, because she's awful and Lord Palmerdale's a git, horrible swine, and we kind of like Skinsale because he's funny and because he conducts himself like a gentleman. It's actually part of the trick. It's quite clever because Skinsale represents a lot of things that aren't okay. And it's a very, dare I say it, very British thing of we kind of respond to people. It sort of explains Jacob Rees-Mogg in a way, who would asset strip this country and sell it for tuppence halfpenny to his mates who don't pay tax in this country. But would do it by quoting Latin and wearing a double-breasted suit and looking like copyright somebody else or Haunted Pencil. Deporting himself with manners and with excellent diction and sort of oldie worldy sort of etiquette, and we like that. We do respond to that. Weirdly, we're a country that has class etched into so many of its interactions and contradictions, and I find I'm drawn to people, in inverted commas, talking properly, and a sort of old-fashionedness that makes me feel comfortable, nostalgic for a time when things were proper. And of course, things weren't proper. We did terrible things in the past, and all these sort of people like Skinsale were terrible hypocrites who hid behind their honour as an excuse to do terrible, terrible things. And yet, I really like Colonel Skinsale, and I think he's charming and funny. And there's a nice subplot here with the money, where, of course, poor old Vince, bless him, doesn't want to do anything bad, but is also, this is the amount of money. This amount of money could be life changing for him. But of course, he later burns it. So actually, it's a terrible waste. He's because that will never. And it almost, doesn't it, within the sort of confines of the story, it sort of signs his death warrant, because he's tempted, albeit very, very briefly, to the dark side. Although actually, him taking the money has nothing to do with his death, not like Skinsale, who dies scrabbling for diamonds. But it does kind of dirty all of the characters, and I like that. I think, again, that's just clever writing. It's not just doing stuff for plot. It's having a sort of thematic thing going on with it. But listen, I was talking about the shape changing. I don't think I ever watched this without knowing, and it's reminiscent. I've mentioned the Thing when I mentioned the fog, but I didn't elaborate. And of course, the Thing is about people in a confined base, and the alien could be any one of us. And I love that. Who Goes There is the original title, isn't it? The sort of paranoia of it's him when they do the blood bit. And this is sort of Doctor Who's equivalent, and it does it well. But does anybody watching think that Reuben is alive at this point? I honestly don't know. And of course, when they cut to him glowing in his bedroom, I think you're really going, oh no, that's the monster. But there are attempts to disguise, because I guess we think Reuben's in his room at this point, do we? Or do we know, no, he's the alien, he's gone into his bedroom and he's changed and he's crawled out and is now going to kill Lord Palmerdale. That's a good shot, because the way that it's shot, and without you hearing the conversation, is suggests the sort of eavesdropping that he's doing. And the fog is coming in, and you can see the green light. And, Palmerdale's had it coming because he's such an awful person. And that fog is nicely in. And it's a good performance by Sean Caffrey. He was a good actor. And as I say, these aren't the sort of parts he normally played. So that's quite nice. But actually, it's quite good casting. I think it's quite good casting. Because a lot of those people from that class did have a sort of underlying brogue. It wasn't quite as RP as I think some casting today would do it. So I think that all works very nicely. Although he is RP, but there's just because he's an Irish actor doing RP, it does give it that slight offness that is accurate. It's good. It's deliberate. It's good. It works. And this, I think, is brilliant because Skinsale, who we really like, has done this on purpose. And he sits there cool as a cucumber going, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And he also gets the catharsis of saying horrible things about Palmerdale, which we like. But now Skinsale, of course, he's going to do a terrible thing. He's worried about his reputation. So, which I was alluding to before. It's all about sort of surface reputation. Well, reputation, actually there's some dramas where that's seen as a good thing. I mean, in the Crucible, John Proctor says, you can have everything, but not my name, because that's who you are, and that's how these people operate. Is that your place in society, your good name is important. Now, when Proctor does it, he's fighting against the evil of the mob. And it's a good thing. Whereas, of course, when Skinsale does it, it's ego and selfishness disguised as honour. And yet we still really like him. Now, so we've seen the glowing around Reuben, but it still ties in with the beast of Fang Rock and going, one of them went mad. Has Reuben gone mad? Which means Vince has reason to worry about his safety, quite rightly, as it turns out. And this is because, they're quite mean to her. You actually feel a bit sorry for her here, because she is in mortal peril. But they haven't got time. Has he done the line about, no, it's now, the Malicious Damage Act 1861 covers lighthouses. I adore, it's just a throwaway. He doesn't even follow it up. In fact, what nothing is, it kind of draws attention to that, which is a shame, because actually it's a beautiful line. It's a beautiful rebuke. And there's something cracking in Leela about going, he's locked in, I've got a mallet, I'm going to smash his door down. Love that. Because she does this stuff without it ever being a suggestion that she's an unthinking, bullish, purely physical creature. Leela is so intelligent and intuitive. She's just not intellectual because her education has not been that way. And I think that is very clever characterization. And that is greatly to Doctor Who's credit. And I think Leela's a brilliant character. I think Leela's an absolutely fantastic character, and they lucked out when they got Louise Jameson to play her. So, part of me goes, I wish you'd taken the money. But it just shows what a good man Vince is, I guess, that he will burn the money on principle when he's, or is he doing it to cover his tracks? No, I don't read it like that. I read it as he didn't want to take it in the first place, and now something terrible has happened. He doesn't want to. He's ashamed of his part in that process, even though he's not responsible for Palmerdale's death. But yeah, I see it as a positive with Vince. I don't see him as he's covering his tracks. I don't think he's that sort of character. A hostile alien from a distant planet. It intends to destroy us. He can just do that dialogue like he's shelling peas. This brilliant stuff comes out of him. It fits him like a glove. Oh, Tom Baker, you're so good. I cannot find the cowardly one. I love that. that Leela is so straight in what she says, and of course that's great. That's the brilliance of the setting. Adelaide had gone upstairs to find Palmerdale, and they went, no, he's not up there. Well, and he's not downstairs either. So this is when they realise, oh, something must have happened to him. And the Doctor's pretty unfeeling the way that he issues this news in front of Adelaide, who he knows won't be able to cope with it. And this is, I think this is Tom, the actor, being quite unkind, actually. Tom, the actor, and therefore the Doctor, being quite unkind, which I don't like as much as I do some of his other readings, because it's sort of almost making light of somebody's death. And now it earns it here because you have that, do you want to go outside and check? Oh, God, I see what this means. And so now they're finally convinced that, he believes in this deadly alien creature. Colin Douglas looks great. But I think his initial breaking of the news, when he does it sort of slightly quizzically, I can see what he's doing there, and it's him being, the alien. I also think it's Tom not massively helping his... Well, I suppose he is helping the actors, because it's an appalling, the juxtaposition between his glibness and Adelaide's, terrible shock, is all part and parcel of the whole makeup of the atmosphere and the dynamics within the thing. But I think I prefer him when he's he's quite cold about the death of Marcus Scarman. He still does have a sort of depth about him. There's a seriousness to it, even with the sort of alien, the dispassionate alienness, as it were. Whereas there, he's doing a sort of gag. But I think it's what you get when you have Tom Baker. He will give surprising line readings, and certainly at this period, 9 times out of 10 they work really, really well. And I quite like something to me as a lad, as a kid, as all of this stuff where the 3 chaps go, right, well, we better go out and have a look. Feels terribly brave. They don't even question that they're going to do it. And I thought, gosh, is that what you do when you're grown up and brave and all of that? And it's the stuff of sort of adventure. And of course, Skinsale has seen death before, because for all of his duplicitousness, he's a man who's seen action and has probably been very brave in it. And of course, yes, these different dynamics throw out a suggestion. Yes, I like the way she goes enough that she's not being cruel to her. She's just, come on. There's a slight gentleness with the tiredness about her. But Tom Baker is brilliant here, and it's a lovely piece of writing that, Skinsale, who we like, has gone, no, I didn't kill him because I was down here. What were you doing down here? Sabotage on the radio? And to protect your honour, you've put all our lives in danger. And yet, Skinsale is still not like the baddie. You'd be sadder if Skinsale died than Lord Palmerdale, because Lord Palmerdale wasn't very nice. Harker, though, is the hero. He's the doughty working man who's entrusted by the Doctor to do the work, and this is the end of him. Oh, and Colin Douglas does a beautiful sort of horror grin, doesn't he? It's a lovely piece of acting, all of this. Look at that. That's glorious. Sort of, and Vince doesn't actually, because Vince dies very quickly in the next episode. So actually, Vince burning the money is pretty much his last action, apart from, saying that the foghorn doesn't work. And I like the way that Tom Baker says Harker in a minute when they realise the implications of the fact that is it called the foghorn? Doesn't work. But that's a great sadistic sort of alien smile, and the way that Reuben goes from sort of being impassive, walking dead man to sadistic, bright-eyed, grimacing alien. He was dead before he hit the ground. You see, that's great writing of the sort of the lines you get during, I know it just past it, but during the Hinchcliffe era of that kind of, he was dead before he hit the ground. It just gives it drama. It gives it input. It makes you feel quite excited, even though it's horrible. In real life, it would be horrible. In drama, it's the stuff of sort of excitement and atmosphere and ominousness. And look at Tom Baker, so good at being a sort of brooding person. And I love all of this stuff about, the Doctor trying to work out who the alien is, because he has this vast sort of storehouse of knowledge. And I love the way that Louise is relaying that news as though she's repeating what she has been told because she doesn't really know how the boiler works and all of that sort of stuff. That's such a clever acting choice of somebody, because somebody who hasn't thought about it enough would just go, oh, Vince says the boiler's thing and the pressure started right. But she doesn't really know what that means. So she's relaying it like it's been told to her. Although actually the reality for Louise Jameson is it hasn't been told to her because there was nobody at the other end. So brilliant. And this is great for the drama because they followed down. So you have the death of Harker, which is terrible because he's a great character. Nice performance from Rio Fanning. But you've got them followed down. We're building to the climax now. So you get the only person that's allowed to really lose it of the characters that are able to be party to this are Adelaide, so we get her losing it. So get her away because the drama's about to ratchet up. But these two can't lose their cool because they're our heroes. So instead, what we have for the cliffhanger is not this is terrible. We have this wise old Time Lord suddenly realizing what's wrong and that he's partially responsible. And again, the way that this is written, rigor mortis, instead of saying, oh, he's been dead, rigor mortis leads us into he's been dead for hours. And then the way that Tom Baker performs this, I think, is fabulous. Even though Tom Baker saying chameleon, I've done a whole podcast about this. This is Tom Baker being naughty because, I'll talk about it next time because we have the early Shmurley as well. Because I don't want to cramp the style of that brilliantly acted cliffhanger. And damn your eyes, I was pressing the button to stop it from cutting out during the credits because I like reading the credits and they provide a lovely backdrop to the climax of this. So unfortunately, I'm not now talking along to the closing credits and the cast because it's raining, there's something wrong with my internet, BritBox is playing up, whatever. Now it's starting episode 4. And also apologies because that episode might have slightly gone out of sync because somebody knocked on the door with a delivery just after the Doctor was told that Lord Palmerdale had fallen off the gantry, and I tried to line it up and sort of re-recorded exactly the same point. But if you're watching along with the episode, you might have gone slightly out of sync, for which I apologise. But I think most people just listen to this when they're out for a walk or presumably while they're having open heart surgery or at the dentist's in order to have something even more painful to distract them from the pain I'm just bestowing upon you. Anyway, I love that episode of Doctor Who. I think it's a wonderfully atmospheric story. It hadn't actually occurred to me when I started. I don't know why I'd started banging on about the fog and the thing. It must have been subconscious because I've never really sort of thought about this echoing those Carpenter films. And we watched lots of films when I was a kid late at night. I was allowed to stay up late at night. But the ones that had the real impact on me, apart from one called The Omega Man with Charlton Heston that I watched as a kid and was the most terrifying thing ever. And I've since watched it and it's not that terrifying, but my goodness. And it's the one that became it's the one based on I Am Legend, isn't it? But Anthony Zerbe and those guys with their white eyes was enough to send the chills down the back of my spine. But it was mostly the Carpenters, and as I say, the Thing, the Fog, Halloween. They're the ones that I remember being the kind of sort of slightly naughty late night horrors that we were allowed to stay up and watch. That I felt a bit growing up being able to stay up and watch. And actually, yeah, this has elements of both the Fog and the Thing. And yet I knew of this before I knew of them because this was a very early Doctor Who on my radar. And I think I'd ruined it for myself by flicking through the book and seeing where I think I knew where most people died before I actually read the story properly. I see, even before the existence of spoilers, I think I spent much of my youth spoiling Doctor Who stories for me by wanting to have a general idea of of the story before getting down to the nitty gritty. I love the idea of being able to discover some. I'm so envious of young people, but not from any sort of curmudgeonly vibe from me or anything like that. But I would love to be a kid or a teenager who's just been introduced to Doctor Who, just fallen in love with Doctor Who. because it gets you when you're young. Imagine, having just watched, the last season or the latest episode. So yeah, say for the sake of argument, having just watched Flux as a kid and got into it and liked these characters, and gone, there's more Doctor Who, isn't there? And discovering all the, all the new Who, as it were. But then there's going to be a subsection of them. Not everybody would then go back and go further back. But imagine being the sort of kid who is, predisposed to consume it all, who then goes, what? There's a pre-series of Doctor Who that's 26 years long, and discovering stories like the horror of Fang Rock first time. And I hope because I think this stuff is more ubiquitous and there's less shame attached to it. See, I was always slightly ashamed of television that was 10, 15 years old because it was easily mocked by my schoolmates. But I think there's enough time passed now that this stuff is, I think, understood slightly more, that, we don't make television like this anymore, but it doesn't matter, in the same way that, when I was getting embarrassed about stuff like this, you didn't get embarrassed about Casablanca and classic films in the same way, because they were venerable and part of history. Now, there will always be, that one show stuff I got annoyed about, people who sort of look back and go, here's a thing they couldn't do because it hadn't been invented yet. I'll laugh at that. But I think that's just best ignored, because it's sort of pointless. You think it's not worth saying. The fact that you think it's worth saying, and that we have whole television programs dedicated to people saying that sort of thing, I think is a sign of the cultural apocalypse that reigns on us all. But it's not actually worth bringing into the conversation, because the sheer joy is the idea that there's going to be a 10-year-old somewhere who loves Jodie Whittaker and has gone back and gone, and I like Peter Capaldi and the Matt Smith, and then there's all these old ones, and an uncle for Christmas goes, well, I know you've got all the new ones, but I found this in a charity shop, and it's the horror of Fang Rock or something. This will be somebody's first classic Who. And imagine it. Oh, it's such good quality, such a good story. Tom Baker is brilliant, and it's got that wonderful template I talked of characters being picked off one by one. I think so moody and atmospheric, partially because Tom Baker's a beast, partially because Paddy Russell's very good with actors and with atmosphere. Louise Jameson, all the cast help. It's a brilliant script from Terence Dicks. And I'm overjoyed that one of the listeners on Patreon, Guy Lambert, the estimable Guy Lambert, who's worked in television himself, has confessed that he's never really got on with horror of Fang Rock, and he's now doing it properly, watching it an episode at a time and listening along to these. So if nothing else, because I don't know any 9-year-olds, but I'm satisfied that there will be one out there for whom this is their first classic Who, and what a start of an exciting journey that will be. And to be young again, but aren't they lucky? And I've been very lucky in my experience of Who as well. I count myself lucky that I witnessed so many episodes that were missing not being missing, and the excitement of that, and the excitement of the resurrection of the show and all sorts. So there's luck wherever. It's just part of the tapestry, the rich tapestry of being a Doctor Who fan, which is all about childhood changing into adulthood and all the love and loss that goes with that. It's love and loss being a Doctor Who fan. It's death and taxes. But look, I don't know. My hope for this is that Guy comes to the end of this process with these 4 episodes and goes, do you know what? I've learned to stop worrying and love the horror of Fang Rock. And then I'll go, it's not the horror of Fang Rock, it's horror of Fang Rock. Do you see how I turned my mistake into his then? Right. Right. Well, my choice, I'm afraid, I mean, I didn't even need to think about it. It's the cliffhanger. It's one of the great Doctor Who cliffhangers. Even though I have this nagging little voice going, but it's obvious. What the cliffhanger tells us is obvious from the beginning of the episode, when Reuben is the walking dead man, and Harker spots him and he goes, "Leave me be," and then he goes up to his room and starts glowing like an alien. But it's not, and of course then you see the alien that kills Palmerdale, which when you think about it, you go, oh, it's crawled out of Reuben's window and gone up because it is Reuben. But that's not explicitly shown. He does glow like an alien, though. A part of me, and I remember being very annoyed about this as a kid, part of me sort of goes, why do they show him glowing? Well, because it's obvious. It's only obvious if you know the cliffhanger's coming. The cliffhanger. So anyway, it's not for me to judge because I go into that cliffhanger with knowledge, and I still love it. So there may be some people who haven't picked up or have been, misdirected by the script and the acting and the performances, and it hasn't occurred to them. Because of course it doesn't start off being a story about an alien that disguises itself as people either. That's not our start point with this alien. It is a revelation. But anyway, whether we know it or not, I think it is a deftly executed cliffhanger, even though Tom Baker deliberately mispronounces a word because he heard Laurence Olivier do that once and thought that would be witty. There's a podcast I do about it, about mispronunciations. And we've all got our own, haven't we? The Logopolises, the Mandragoras. I was neither of those, but I was a crinoid. I've done a whole podcast about those where I miss out loads. I spent ages on that podcast. Then loads of people went, oh, I did this one. And I was like, well, I did that one as well. Why didn't I think of it and put it in the podcast? But I suppose that's part of what these are about, because they're essentially tedious monologues. I'm glad that there is an element where people go, oh no, I think this and can contribute that, and it provokes a conversation that is had beyond. So that justifies the nearly 40-minute solo Hadoke that you've had to endure. I guess that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. So listen, Martin Geraghty has been choosing his favourite things about horror of Fang Rock. And I think I think we've been pretty much on the same wavelength. And so I will be interested to see if he chooses the cliffhanger for episode 3, which I think is regarded as one of the best cliffhangers, even though it's telling us what most of us have picked up, because it's just such a great performance from Tom Baker, and it's a great kind of subversion of the usual thing. Instead of going, that thing's going to get in, it's that thing's in and I've locked it in. That's great. It's a great terrible revelation. So I'm saying the cliffhanger, one of the great Doctor Who cliffhangers, that is more than a sum of its parts and actually exceeds its limitations, one of which is that the central one of which is, I've got a sneaking suspicion it's not actually that much of a surprise, but it doesn't matter. It's bloody brilliant.
Now, episode 3. This one is all about the cliffhanger, which, in contrast to many Doctor Who stories, is just a couple of understated lines as opposed to a companion in mortal danger, the reveal of a monster, or some whopping explosion which wipes out part of a base or something. The Fourth Doctor realises his mistake in a great chilling moment that sets the scene for the final episode. I vividly remember watching this on original transmission and remember my auntie letting out a tut of exasperation that she had to wait a week to find out what happens, as obviously binge watching was an unheard of luxury in 1977.
Yes! The cliff. I get a point. Now I have to go back because there's been a slight gap. I think Martin and I are doing pretty well. Well, I'm doing pretty well at being along the same lines as Martin. So having self-sabotaged Fury from the Deep just recently, I'm not going to get my hopes up too much because it's very unusual that I triumph. In fact, I've triumphed once, come close a couple of times, but this feels like it might at least be a close one, and that's a victory of sorts. So there might be a little bit of triumph amongst the corpses next week, spoiler alert, but if you're watching on the DVD, you've seen everybody get killed already, which makes me furious. But Oh, it's such a good story, isn't it? Such a good story. Classic ingredients of classic Doctor Who for me. Brilliant. I defy anything on that week to be as good a piece of telly as this. You know, there will be some adult dramas that you will watch from that week that are slower, that are clumsier, that don't have as uniformly good casting, that don't have, you know, a theme within the story, subtext, things pivoting on characters that are contradictory and yet logically so, and two leading actors who are, you know, the very pinnacle of the television professionals working at that time. Oh, Horror of Fang Rock. You have this is because sometimes I do this because I have to, you know, I've got to get stuff out there. This is what I've chosen to do, to podcast and to be positive and all of that sort of stuff. And sometimes, and it's always an enlightening experience because I'm going into it with the remit of being as positive as I possibly can. But sometimes I knew I was going to like this one. But actually, sometimes the ones I like, I've sort of rehearsed in my own head why I like them anyway. So it can be a bit of a chore sometimes, or I find it difficult to articulate. I'm not saying I haven't found this difficult to articulate, but I've certainly really been inspired and enthused and nourished by the process. It's a reminder of why I love Doctor Who. So I think this is so good. There's no tongue in my cheek as I watch this. There's no sort of lofty disdain for stuff from my childhood that now looks a little bit naff. I genuinely think this is high quality, brilliant Doctor Who, which means that it's high quality, brilliant television, a classic of its genre, a jewel in Doctor Who's crown, and yet a very humble offering. A small group of people in a small location getting picked off by a monster. I mean, that's what it is, really. But of course, when Doctor Who is on song, it takes those humble ingredients and, like a master Italian chef with just a tomato, but a damn good tomato, and some basil, but the finest basil, and some olive oil, but my God, he knows exactly how much to sprinkle and where. And you can create something layered and flavorful and sophisticated and yet deceptively simply brilliant, but that goes down a treat. Oh. Well, welcome everybody. It's time for the final episode of Horror of Fang Rock. The one that features The Ballad of Fladden Isle by William Wilfred Gibson, which we studied at school. And I don't know if I knew it first and was impressed that it turned up in Doctor Who, because it's, of course, the last thing in the book, and indeed the last thing in the episode, or whether I knew it from the book. We did it at junior school. We did it quite early, but it's a wonderful, wonderful poem. I actually read it for we need stuff to go in the sort of advert break, as it were, of Excess Malarkey when we were doing it during the plague, and I'd occasionally just do something random that I just thought would be quite fun to do and that would fill the space and that was copyright free because we were on Twitch. So I did the Ballad of Fladden Isle. Thoroughly enjoyed it. What a great poem. Anyway, and it serves as a wonderful inspiration for this, and a wonderful moody coda, as we will see. But before we go in, a nod to my very special guest, Martin Geraghty, who is a very gifted artist whose work you will have seen in Doctor Who magazine and in the Doctor Who DVD range, where he designs a lot of the characters to be animated. He's a very humble and nice fellow who wears his talent lightly and is as much of a fan as the rest of us. So what a joy that he's chosen such an excellent story, and he's been an advocate for it that I would say is on my wavelength, which I'm encouraged by. And I think I got a soupçon of a point for episode 1. Don't think I quite got for episode 2, even though we'd skirted around the same areas. We did share a point for episode 3. So it's all to play for, because episode 4, as regular listeners will know, the final episode requires me to come up with a bonus thing as well as my favourite thing from this episode. So I'm going to accentuate the positive whilst swimming through the bloodbath that is Horror of Fang Rock, episode 4. And let's see what joy I can glean from the Doctor Who story with the highest casualty rate percentage-wise of its characters. In that, yes, there are stories where more people die, but there aren't stories where just this once, Rose, everybody dies. So let us. I'm just gonna line this up and go back. And I'm on BritBox. You may be on the DVD, not the Blu-ray. As I record this, no such thing exists. But I believe they will all be out one day. So I've lined up Horror of Fang Rock Part 4. And we are going to press play in 3, 2, 1. So what joy. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because this very much feels more like the Holmes and Hinchcliffe era than it does the Graham Williams era, which is more light-hearted, which is, frankly, has, as time goes on, less good production values. Poor old Graham Williams was clobbered not only by the fact that I think Tom Baker pushed him about a bit. Tom Baker himself gets a bit more wayward, I think, as time goes on and as he gets a little bit bored. And there is an element of Tom Baker that tests you. I know this from I love him. He's my childhood hero. He's been very kind to me as an actor and as somebody I've had the pleasure of doing professional engagements with and alongside, and as an email correspondent. But I think he likes to test people. I've certainly had that experience where I've had to go, he's not making this easy. And he's quite enjoying not making this easy. And I don't think he knows he does it, but he can. So that, he's a complicated figure. And I didn't quite realise how scary he was as a Doctor. When I was a kid, I just loved him because he was Doctor Who and he was funny and he was otherworldly and he had wide eyes and was exciting. But it's that extra element of danger that he gives that really makes him. So poor old Vince here, having had quite a big part of the drama, is polished off almost immediately that this episode begins. And I think that's very, very sad because he's a lovely, lovely character. But I suppose he thematically signed his death warrant by taking Lord Palmerdale's money. And that's kind of, he's out of the drama then. If you look at what he actually does in the story, it's not an awful lot, come episodes once Palmerdale's gone. So I suppose... it needed to get him. I remember Tom Baker being quite admiring of Louise's using of the shovel here, saying that a lesser actress would have been more assured in the using of it, and he's quite right. But yeah, so poor old Vince has gone, and this means something for the credit. I've just remembered when I started watching old episodes, I think episode 4 of this was on a tape with something else. So episode 4 was the first episode of this I watched. And then I watched episodes 1 to 3 later. God, why do I ruin things for myself? So yes, that's right, because the credits for this are in a slightly different order. They do a rare thing, because normally, characters are, unless it's order of appearance, which is what happens in the 60s. This is a good idea. I like that Leela's coming up with a good idea. The credits here, they decide to shove Vince and Lord Palmerdale a bit further down because Vince dies early and Lord Palmerdale is dead. So that the actors that do a little bit more move up the credits, and that seems to me logical and sensible. But that's unusual. Usually, if you're second guest credited actor, you are throughout your appearances. There are anomalies. I've accounted for them all. I've also done a podcast on credit order in Doctor Who because I'm a terrible, terrible example of humanity. All of this dialogue and interaction between the Doctor and Leela is great. That's the beautiful thing about episodes. I mean, look at that. He's reasoning. He's not only getting out the exposition and going, right, what I've got to work out what's happening. He gives it that real sort of visceral import as he realizes the consequences. So I don't know. I can't remember the details of why this was the first episode of this I watched, but I think in retrospect that was a shame. But it was that thing of, if I'd got it and it was available and I got to experience, the characters and what it looked like, then I would, which seemed more important to me than sort of experiencing the story in order. Poor old Harker. And we must fight for our lives. And, poor old. But even that isn't played too stupid. Even though you've got Leela sort of casting her eyes skyward, I still sort of believe it. Adelaide is from a particular time period and is highly strung. And actually during this process, I remember once with a friend talking through, is there a Doctor Who performance? Is there a Doctor Who story that doesn't have at least one bad performance in it? This was years ago we were doing this, and we usually found one. I would be more generous now. And that was an effect that I never thought that quite worked. I know it's been slightly tarted up for the remastering, but actually that looks pretty good. But again, Ruben is doing what Skinsale did in the previous episode, where he's sort of just, casting his eyes slightly downwards or in a slightly different direction. He would see the thing he's looking for, but he doesn't bother. But it's a sort of television staging thing that you get used to. But and I remember my friend saying, "Oh no, Adelaide in Horror Fang Rock." When I said, "Oh, there's nobody bad in Horror Fang Rock," I actually think I've really appreciated her in this. I'm loving Colin Douglas's terrible face, which I've not really thought about too much before when I watch this. You just go, well, it's just being the alien. But actually, that sort of cadaverous grimace, it's sort of bright-eyed and it's cheerful, but it's also like a death mask, and that juxtaposition is greatly Doctor Who. Cheerful death, that's Doctor Who. Death and laughter. And you've got all this plot stuff going on with the Doctor here, because he's got that beacon and all of that, which is actually less important to the story than the sort of the characters in peril here. So poor old Adelaide there gets, she's not particularly much use to the story anymore. So she's gone. But I think Anna actually did a really good job with a hard character there. She's supposed to be annoying, but she doesn't ever make you think, oh God, I'm uncomfortable watching this. I'm annoyed watching this. She's annoying to exactly the right level and the right pitch. And as I say, they even get away with it with the sort of wah, 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 she's fainted and Leela's slightly annoyed. It's real. I believe it. Now, this is, I think, probably where there's a weakness in the story, isn't there? With where we now have... Now, every time I've watched it before, it's felt like 10 minutes. It's probably about 3. Where he's going to change them. And I remember this line from the book. I remember Reuben the Rutan. So that then when from flicking through it, so that then, of course, when I started reading it, I knew where Reuben is actually, the sort of the main protagonist in the lighthouse, really, in the first episode. To me, his card was always marked. He was always the bad guy, even though he's not actually a bad guy at the beginning. So again, that's another example of when you come at these stories not fresh because you've read about them, or you've read about the characters, or you've read the book, or you've read the episode endings in the DWM episode guides. Again, to come to this stuff fresh. But then again, when I discovered the things about them for the first time, oh boy, they were exciting. Now, the proportions aren't great here. It's not quite rationalized properly. There's actually nothing wrong with the monster. I like the sort of wispy white stuff and the fact that the green, the green, as Terence Dix would say, is not just green. It's got the sort of luminescence and the fluorescence about it. I think that's an intelligent choice. But and this has got some wonderfully, well, we'd say Holmesian, wouldn't we? But Terence Dix is, I think, not given as much credit for being equally good with world building and with jokes as Robert Holmes. It's just that Dix writes fewer actual scripts. And I don't like your face either. But all this stuff about Mutter's spiral and all of that. And the fact that they've decided to go, and actually, why don't we have the monster as the monster that fights with the Sontarans? I can't quite rationalise if I think about it. And I know Shakedown decided to, the spin-off video, had the Sontarans and the Rutans in it together, but the Rutans in it together. But Doctor Who has never had that face-off, and they do seem to be from different genres, really. The sort of warlike, clone, militaristic Sontarans, and the shape-shifting jellyfishes. Although Dix does in the dialogue that he gives, by them referring to themselves as a group entity and a we, and all of this, and there is some militaristic stuff about the mothership and all of this. That does give them a sort of certain speech patterns that make them seem perhaps more militaristic than a shape-shifting jellyfish kind of suggests. It's a bit like in Cold War when the Ice Warrior becomes, a thing scuttling through the air ducts. It's sort of like, I'm a bit. Those two things seem to me to be slightly incompatible. Why have you got the big armored militaristic thing being that monster? In the same way as you go, why have you decided that the one to be the archenemy of the Sontarans is the one that seems slightly, they don't quite match in this in the same way. But I like it because what it buys us is a nice little thing that just knits the Doctor Who universe together. This could just be a monster called a Zing-Zong or whatever, but the fact that Dix has made it connect with the Sontarans, even though their connection with the Sontarans has nothing to do with the story or its denouement or anything to do with it, it's just like it's like the bit in The Awakening where they find the Tinclavic. It just ties it in for no other reason than just to knit the Doctor Who universe together, and I like that. It doesn't, non-regular viewers, it will go over there. They won't think they've not been privy to something, and regular viewers get a nice little moment. I got through the big chat of, I remember it's in the Tom Baker years, isn't it, where I think they have that bit on the video and he goes, oh, that's got a lot of chat. And I think he does kind of, point out that the story does kind of stop while the Doctor and the Rutan sort of explain stuff to each other. But, it's Tom Baker doing it, so it's okay. And it's our first proper look at the monster. Even though, as I say, the proportions are slightly mixed. I'll live with it, but I think it is a slight Achilles heel in the day. Right, and here he says it's an early Shmerly, and I think it's pronounced Shermerly, but that's Tom Baker going, wouldn't it be witty if I said early Shmerly? As he's also said, I'll say chameleon factor, even though, because it's about shape-shifting, it has to be chameleon because he's referring to, and I know a chameleon doesn't change. Somebody's written in when I was talking about Silver Nemesis. But, chameleons are famous for blending in with their surroundings or changing colour or whatever. And the chameleon circuit is the TARDIS blending in with its surroundings. So the chameleon factor is about changing shape, is about adapting to your environment. And he's said that lovely thing earlier about, they bred in the sea but adapted to land. And so it's this so that ties in actually very nicely with the idea of, well, why is it a shapeshifter? Oh, because it's a creature that has gone through an evolutionary process, and maybe part of that is now, if its evolutionary process means that it has a sympathy with being able to, bend its shape around its surroundings in order to camouflage itself or whatever, and that gives us the who goes there, the devil amongst us, the who can we trust element of this story, which could have been actually played slightly more. It's not like the thing where there's suspicion on everyone around the corner, but it does give us the lovely cliffhanger and the way of having the creature among them in the shape of Reuben. But it's not it's not as at the forefront as the shape shifting of, say, the Zygons. But it's a nice extra element that fits, and it fits within the actually quite complex jigsaw of what appears on the surface quite a simple story. And I love that Tom Baker makes Leela smile there, because it's a brilliant idea. And it means that the lighthouse becomes the key to the destruction of the alien, which ties in with the theme of electricity and makes the setting more than just window dressing. And then you've got the diamonds that add to that, the diamonds that have been the cause of the dishonesty and the duplicity and the flaws in these characters, but diamonds tie in with light, and that becomes a focusing thing for the light beam. And it's brilliant. That is so crackingly plotted and fits together so brilliantly. It's a wonderful flourish to make the ending all tie together so neatly and appropriately. But yes, Tom Baker saying early Shmerly and chameleon factor is because I've noticed it, and he does this with certain words on occasion. And you can, and in Nightmare of Eden, he's going, well, I'll say Hecate, because when you're doing the Scottish play or doing various dramas from that period, the goddess, although they call it, she's called, I think for the verse she's called, anyway, Hecate or Hecate, and Tom Baker's gone, well, I've heard it pronounced Hecate somewhere, and everyone else is going, but it's just the spaceship, isn't it? They'd call it Hecate, we'll call it the Hecate. Tom Baker goes, I'll call it Hecate, and Alan Bromley walks off. So clearly here is, it's part of that, what I was referring to at the beginning, sort of slightly testing. I'll go, well, I'll say chameleon, wouldn't it be witty? And Paddy Russell's going, have I got the energy to fight this? Because it does actually pull focus from the cliffhanger slightly, because you're going, does he mean chameleon? And decides not to fight that battle. And it comes from, I was in a green room with Tom, and he was talking about working with Olivier, and Olivier pronounced the word beryl, and he said, I rather liked it when he took an ordinary word and pronounced it slightly off kilter. It pricked up your ears, it made you listen. And so I think it's a trick he learned from Olivier, or something that Olivier had done that he found beguiling, so decided to do it himself. But being typically Tom, I think, decided to do it slightly belligerently and to test people. Now, I like early Shmerly. I'm not wild about chameleon factor, although it does sound good, chameleon factor. But even though it's wrong, it actually looks wronger with the subtitles, because you can see the word written down. You go, what's he doing? But that's my theory of it, and I think I've asked him about this in an interview I've done with him for a future project. So listen out, because I think I do ask him about beryl and chameleon factor and early Shmerly. And I hate this bit because it's such a needless. I mean, why's the Doctor done that as well? The Doctor's partially responsible, but it is. But it's appropriate. Skin Sale, the man of honour, the military hero, the one that knows death, but the one that has to protect his honour and that we like because he's sardonic and he's brave. He teams up with the Doctor and Leela, and he comes up with the idea of the diamond. He's the guest. He's the guest hero. Dies scrabbling around for money, for jewels, for trinkets. Now, and in the book, this is slightly different, because I'm sure she says, where's Skin Sale? And he says, dead. And she goes, with honour. And he goes, yes. But he's lying to her, because Terence Dick says, the Doctor image of Skin Sale scrabbling around, it was not a way to go. But he lies to tell Leela he died with honour, to at least give him a sort of fitting, well, not a fitting, but a kind report in death, a kind memorial, as it were. But Tom's decided to. I don't know if I should have checked the script. I have it. Whether in the script it's like that, and Tom's gone, I'm just going to say dead with honour, and they've gone fine. Or whether Terence rethought it and just made a slightly different grace note of it in the book, which he's prone to do. Terence quite often corrects mistakes in the book. He ties up loose ends, and maybe thought, actually, that's a better way of doing this dead with honour bit, is to actually make it a lie to Leela when she asks. She introduces the concept of honour, and the Doctor goes, yeah, okay. Which I think works slightly better, because I think it highlights the concept of honour and the irony of it, especially when the Doctor, when asked, slightly misreports it, which I think underlines the sort of ironic nature of the death more than him just throwing out dead with honour. So that's one that works slightly better in the book, I think. It looks pretty good, the sort of grim bits of the Rutan flapping about and leaving bits of jelly on the stairs. That works very nicely. And it's uncomfortable, isn't it? Leela sort of glorying in the death of her enemy, which she would do. This is nice characterization. Nice people that we like, do things that we find distasteful. And of course, in Leela's morality, this is a sneaky, cowardly enemy that disguises itself as people and picks people off without, facing them in battle, as it were. So it is a contemptible thing, and she glories in its destruction. But she's also the second lead in a children's science fiction show, and the sort of empathic female character who we see larging it up over her defeated enemy. And that I like the fact that makes you uneasy. And Louise Jameson is a clever enough actress that you don't lose your sympathy with Leela, even though what she's doing is disconcerting. It's a nice piece of writing. I've just watched a series on Disney called The Bear about chefs, and what I love about that is that all of the characters have nice aspects and nice elements, and all of them have terrible aspects and terrible elements, and sometimes exhibit both within the space of a scene. But it's never, and it takes clever writing and acting in order to do that and let it speak for itself and not seem contradictory. But the characters, because they're truthfully done, it works. It never takes you out of it and makes you think that it's wrong. I love this. I love that Leela's gone back for a knife, and now does the Doctor go back for her? She's so cool. I love the way he sort of runs in to go back for her. She's already gone out. Love little touches like that. And now we back on film. Yes, we are. Oh, and I'd remembered, of course. This is the famous sequence of Leela's eyes getting changed because she was. That's a great model shot as well. And actually, the effects aren't bad. I don't think it's great with the shooting star coming past the lamp room a couple of minutes ago, but it was fine. But that's actually a very, very good model shot. But this is great. Again, Leela, such an interesting, fascinating character, saying, "Kill me because I'm blind." Now, again, that says a lot about the sort of cold pragmatism of where she's come from. We don't think badly of her for us, although the idea now that and it speaks to, actually, I won't bang on because it's a pet subject of mine, but it is the way that a disability is seen as something that makes you less able, and in the cold pragmatism of a tribe like the Sever team, you're better off dead. Now, of course, that is not something that we in the enlightened 21st century should think about people with disabilities, and we know that people with disabilities are more capable in other areas and shouldn't be defined by the one disability that they have. There's all of that, all of that. But again, it's a nice little window into the different morality that this Leela, who is a character that we like and enjoy, and who is kind and thoughtful and intuitive and funny, is also, grimly pragmatic about, I can't see, kill me. And of course, the way that the Doctor reacts to that is a sort of charming juxtaposition to that. I love a model shot. I love a little model TARDIS, and this one's got a slightly out of focus lighthouse in the background. I think that why do I love that more than I would love it if it was CGI? I don't know. It's something about the proportions, the fact that you can sort of feel it and touch it, the texture of it. I love that final shot, and I adore the fact. See, Vince gets credited after Adelaide there, because in that episode, he doesn't survive more than a couple of minutes. John Walker's the film cameraman. I had the pleasure of interviewing him recently, but don't think I asked him about Horror Fang Rock because there's not much goes on with that. I think I did ask him, and he didn't remember anything about it. Paul Allen, I think Phil Newman might have interviewed Paul Allen, but I adore the Ballad of Flannan Isle and the little echo that they give it, and it's just a way, isn't it? Isn't it wonderful in science fiction how you can do a little literary reference to something and it just gives it a little bit more impact, a bit more import. It gives it a sort of depth and a history. And if something's got a history, it makes it old, and therefore it makes it resonant, and it makes it atmospheric, and it makes it classical. And that's why this working as a period piece helps as well as setting it at the dawn of electricity, which is, thematically apposite. Oh, it's great. And everybody dies. Ha, 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 ha. But that ending is glorious. And, of course, it makes you, if you encounter that poem at school, it gives it an extra frisson when you encounter it. And as I say, I can't quite remember which order, but it's always a poem I sort of like go, oh, and I can quote bits of this as well because it's got the Doctor Who connection. It gave it a slight edge and it made me slightly more interested. Doctor Who engages you. If Doctor Who can connect to something that you're learning about in school, it gives that thing in school slightly more, it gives you slightly more of an interest in it. So in a way, Sidney Newman's desires live on, even if not as overtly as in the way that the storytelling that he imagined. But what it's saying is, if you harness kids' imagination, and you're making kids television with intelligence and written by intelligent people and performed by skilled people, it means that when they link that adventure that so beguiles and entrances and bewitches you, if they then invoke something else, that thing is gets a sheen of quality by association, and makes you but therefore more interested in it. And that's great. And I think, and that's why having, Nikola Tesla or Mary Shelley or any of these people in Doctor Who, which I mentioned two very recent examples, is important and part of what Doctor Who should be doing. And I know some very clever scientific people who were drawn to the science of Doctor Who. I'm not scientific at all, but there are poems, there are Shakespeare quotes that light up for me a bit more because they've been mentioned in Doctor Who, so that then when I was doing them at school, I perhaps dived into them a little bit further, whatever it is that's your thing, because Doctor Who has such a broad palette and the character is so interesting and so knowledgeable about so many different things. He's a great entry-level introduction to something that might then become your associated passion, as well as presenting you an adventure about a shape-shifting jellyfish that kills everybody. I mean, from the sublime to the ridiculous, but that's why I love popular culture, because something that's self-consciously high art can by its nature be exclusionary. Oh God, I've had free tickets to an art gallery and found that out for myself. Are you sure you should be here? Whereas something that's popular culture now, you can do stuff that has no pretensions beyond, as Terence Dick said, avoiding putting the test card out. I think he did himself down a little bit there. But there's certainly lots of television made then and now where the people making it are just earning a living and just slapping stuff out there, often with contempt for the audience. I don't think Doctor Who very rarely has contempt for the audience. The people making it are at least trying to have some fun, at the very least, and transmit that to the crowd. But at its best, there's so much else going on, because the process of writing something that requires such imagination, I think, fires all the other synapses. The process of acting something that you have to make not ridiculous, it means that you sharpen up your performance in other areas. The process of making something where you have to carry off hard special effects or, a horror story on a on the budget of something that's usually just 4 people in a room talking about stuff. Everybody has to be across everything, and so I think it just like exercise makes, if you're exercising your arms, it doesn't matter because the endorphins are going to other parts of your body as well. I think that's what working on Doctor Who's a bit like. You're sharpening up your skill in one particular area, but it can't help to influence all of the other bits, and then that sprinkles all sorts of different layers of magic dust on your audience. Can you tell I like the horror of Fang Rock? I'm invigorated by watching that. I haven't been very well lately. I'm still a bit tired. I'm still a bit in recovery, really, and it's taken longer than I would like. I am invigorated by the 4 episodes I've just spent in the company of Messrs. Baker, Dix, Jameson. Can a lady be a messer? I don't know. Rowe, Douglas, Abbott, Fanning, Caffrey, Woollett, even Ralph Watson. Yeah, God bless. So look, I've got 2 things, and I'm going to do a podcast about this. I haven't written it yet, but about getting so close to victory and mucking it up, because I think Doctor Who's a bit like that as well, because I don't think there is a perfect Doctor Who story. I think it's impossible, and it's partially because the fandom is so self-loathing that we could never find it perfect anyway. There would always be something to go, oh, but it's a shame about that bit. So it's as much about our symbiotic relationship with the programme. But I certainly identify with the idea of Doctor Who is ramshackle, the Doctor is not the traditional hero. The TARDIS is not the best ship in the fleet. It's slightly broken. You have to hit it with a hammer to make it work properly. I will never quite be good enough for any of the things I do to be truly happy. I will never be quite successful enough and I've had so many great kind of opportunities and things that on paper look amazing, but I've usually messed something up, or I take away an embarrassment, or I'm slightly ashamed of the way that came out, or for some reason it went really, really, really well, but then didn't lead to that next thing, and I've got no understanding why, but because nothing's ever bloody perfect. And that's that. And Doctor Who, to me, personifies that. And the horror of Fang Rock has an element of that to it as well. But I'm just sort of speaking out loud to remind myself I've got to do an indefinable magic about, I had a whole bit in My Stepson Stole My Sonic Screwdriver that I cut out at the last minute about the giant rat, and basically saying, in every, even in a Doctor Who story that fires on all cylinders so brilliantly, there's a bit that just makes you go, oh, why does that have to be so crap? And of course in Talons it's the giant rat, but I think there's something in every Doctor Who story that's just a bit that makes you go, oh, I wish that was better. But I think life is like that as well, and I think that's rich pickings for a podcast about how Doctor Who mirrors life, but how actually there is something. Failure is one of the basic freedoms. There is something about not being quite perfect and accepting that nothing is quite perfect that is quite charming and quite freeing, and allows you to be rueful rather than cross. And I think we are better if we are rueful rather than cross. I'm thinking out loud now, so this might be repeated in the podcast that eventually arrives. Horror of Fang Rock. What do I like about episode 4? Well, do I say the fact that everyone dies? Is that a thing I like about the story? I think it is. I like the clever denouement that uses the setting and the light as actually part of the way of dispatching the alien. I like the way the Rutan speaks. I think it gives it it shows some effort has gone, and it's not too hokey. Sometimes when people give alien speech patterns, it can be a bit, particularly in American stuff, it can be a bit, it could be a bit boringly lofty or a bit comically over sincere. I quite like the way that Terence has just gone, I'm going to make this thing enunciate itself. I'm going to make this thing express itself in slightly different ways. I think that works. I like the fact that the Rutan ties in with the Sontarans for no purpose whatsoever other than to just make a nice little thread in the Doctor Who family tree. The little Doctor Who connections. I love the character of Colonel Skinsale. I love Alan Rowe as an actor. and the fact that he's one of those actors that works with 3 doctors and pops up in nice bits over a relatively lengthy period, and the fact that one early piece of detective work I did when I was going through an old Spotlight, I noticed that Alan Rowe's Spotlight photo was taken by Geoffrey Bayldon, because you have to credit the photographer in Spotlight, and Geoffrey Bayldon was taken by Alan Rowe, and I went, oh, now is that a thing? And I was right. Yes, they were partners. If I told you how annoyed I was with the Guardian when Geoffrey Bayldon died, and it said he leaves a brother or whatever, but it doesn't mention he outlived his partner of 50 years, Alan Rowe. The Guardian said to me, well, no, we spoke to the Catweasel Society, and it was like, yeah, well, I don't think the Catweasel Society I either knew or were particularly enamoured, because quite a lot of TV programme societies don't give a monkeys about the person outside of the TV show that these people are interested in. And I was very cross, because it's basically, if and particularly if, you wouldn't do that with a non-gay couple. It would be no question that somebody's opposite sex partner of 50 years would not be considered worth mentioning. Now, I think they didn't know, but I think it was easier to overlook because it was 2 men. And that's The Guardian, which is a very liberal newspaper and doesn't hide such things. But it just goes to show how insidious some of this stuff sometimes is without us even realising it, and even within the most liberal of environments. And they sort of said to me, well, if you want to write in a letter, we'll print it. And I was like, no, I'm not going to. No, I think it seemed to me the wrong way of doing it. It should have been in the main body piece. I just felt they should have just added it later, rather than it be me writing in to point out the mistake. It should just be a correction and a clarification. As I'm saying that now, I feel I should have written in, but I was annoyed at the time about the way that they'd gone about it. And I work for them, I write for them. Do you know what I mean? I write these things. But yes, it just occurs to me that that's just a little sign that when things are not as equal as we sometimes, I think, pat ourselves on the back that they are. So I'm going to acknowledge here that Alan Rowe, Colonel Skinsale, and Geoffrey Bayldon, Organon, Catweasel, Big Finish's first Doctor, were a partnership for, I think, 50 years at least. Alan Rowe is actually from New Zealand. Played a lot of English gentlemen, but from New Zealand. I love Alan Rowe. I think he's a good... Skinsale is one of my favourite Doctor Who characters. I think I like those sorts of characters anyway, especially as I am drawn to them, but they reveal to have a hypocrisy underneath, and yet I still can't hate him. And I think that speaks to so much, as I referred to earlier, about our society and about Englishness and Britishness and class and all of those stuff. So I'm uneasy about why I like that character so much, because Terence Dicks doesn't hide his hypocrisies, but yet I still really like him and I want him to survive. And he's charming and he's funny and he's very watchable. So I think Colonel Skinsale and Colonel Skinsale's... I mean, I hate Skinsale's death, but I'm supposed to hate it. It's an ignominious, horrible thing, and it wouldn't have happened if the blooming Doctor hadn't thrown the blooming diamonds down. But it's a great part of the story. So, Skinsale's death, can I tie that in with Everybody Dies? Yeah, because he's the last character to die. And, you kind of expect him to survive, really. So the fact that everybody dies and the last of them is Skinsale, and Skinsale is such a good character and Skinsale's death is so horrible. I'm counting all of those things as one thing, just because I'm trying to give myself a chance for once. And I also like the fact that it ends with the echoey Ballad of Flannan Isle, which I think is just the cherry on the top. That's my bonus thing, is that coda is the cherry on the top of a particularly delicious cake made out of the bodies of the entire supporting cast. So it's a delicious Doctor Who cake. It's made of some of the most awful, gruesome ingredients, and yet it tastes so good. So Skinsale / Everybody Dies I mean, all the characters are great. I love Harker. I think Harker's one of my favourite characters in Doctor Who because he's the other end of the scale. He's so sort of straightforward, but and heroic, but in a totally sort of undemonstrative way. I like that. I love the bit where they go out in episode 3, the Doctor and Skinsale and Harker, and they just do it because they have to do it, and there's no question. That kind of sort of underplayed bravery, I like. That appeals to the sort of boy's own stuff in me, I guess. And then the Ballad of Flannan Isle, which I think, I talked about the educational content of Doctor Who and the fact that tying into something literary just gives it a bit of heft beyond its sort of popular culture environs. But I mean, there's so much. Paddy Russell, I think, deserves a nod for wrangling Tom Baker. I've already mentioned Terence Dix. Maybe I should give Paddy the nod. It's so easy to take directors for granted, and her direction is not like, I probably, I know I've picked Michael Ferguson for his because of the way that he moves his camera and the avant-garde way he edits occasionally, but why is, mood and atmosphere and working with actors that Paddy Russell does somehow not seen as good as camera work that draw and stunt sequences that draw your attention to them, easier to notice. That a lot of what works there is Paddy Russell doing it but not showing her working in a way. Oh, should I choose Paddy? So everybody dies. Skinsale and his death. Can I tie those together? I think I can. Ballad of Flannan Isle. Paddy Russell. Gosh. Because the directors we tend to choose are the ones who show they're working, and like great lighting in a theatre, it's really, really good if you don't come out going, hey, the lighting was good, wasn't it? And I know that Paddy was having to wrangle, one different setting because everyone had to pack up and move to Birmingham with a relatively inexperienced at making this kind of programme crew. And she was having to deal with Tom Baker and Louise Jameson not getting on, and Tom Baker not getting on with Paddy. Whereas I think Louise liked her. I know that Elizabeth Sladen and Paddy didn't get on so much. Damn it, I'm very fond of Paddy Russell. I've got what's left of her paperwork upstairs in a cat's litter tray. She bought us sandwiches and crisps when we went to her house, and she worked on the Quatermass serials. And this is her last episode of Doctor Who, and she was a woman in a man's world, which is why she was called Paddy Russell. I have a brother called Paddy, but he's Patrick. But she was Paddy because she was Patricia, because actually when men saw, if men were to see Patricia on a call sheet, they would have it in their mind to play up before she even entered the studio. So she was Paddy Russell, so that she had to alter that mindset. That buys into, again, stuff I was talking about with Baildon and Rowe. There were sort of little prejudices that I will never have had to have faced, but are worth talking about, not because I'm woke or because I'm right on, or because actually this sort of stuff was real and is embedded and is still probably part of our DNA, even if it's been watered down a little bit. But it's all where we've come from, and it all informs everything that we do. And if you look at a program now and go, well, how come the 3 main protagonists are women? Or why is it, why does this have to, why is everyone celebrating that it's a woman writer and a woman director? Because we've come from a not too distant past where that sort of stuff would be seen as ludicrous. Why? Well, because you don't get many women writers and directors, and nobody's interested in all-female drama, all of that. And we're richer for more experience. And of course, why should one half of the population be less expected to be creative on paper or to be good at directing? Do you know what I mean? Why is that something that should be dictated by, whether you're male or female? That seems very odd. But of course, it's a very rare thing. So I'm not being woke when I'm going, there aren't many female directors in the whole history of classic Doctor Who. And I understand that it was part of the time, and I'm not angry with the fact that there weren't, but it's worth noting that there weren't, and it's worth noting what the norms of the time were. And that then reminds us actually how extraordinary it was then that there was somebody like Paddy, and why she had to perhaps be quite so no-nonsense as she was. I found her a bit terrifying, but she was lovely. She bought sandwiches and crisps. I think I put the terrifying upon her, and she could give a withering stare. I remember when she's got a telesnap of her in Dr. Korjak and the Children, and I said, "Oh, did you take that?" And she looked at me as if to say, "Well, how could I have taken that? Because I was in the studio doing that when that, And you go, "Oh yeah, maybe it wasn't Dr. Korjak, but it was something. It was something that she couldn't possibly have taken because it's of her on a monitor." And she just gave me "That's a really stupid question." I was like, "Oh, fair enough." But yeah, she could put you down with a stare, but she was lovely. She was lovely, and she wasn't the best interviewee. She's quite monosyllabic on that Invasion of the Dinosaurs track, which is why in the final episode that we had with her, instead of talking about what's going on screen, fortunately, because I knew about other stuff from her career, because I'd already interviewed her about Quatermass and we talked about her early days, we talk about her whole career. And I know some people go, "Why don't they talk about Invasion of the Dinosaurs?" Because she was going yes and no. That's why. And we improvised on the day, and I think we did a damn good job, because if you looked over the filmed interview we did with her, a lot of her replies were quite succinct and to the point. So look, yes, the more I think about it, it's Paddy Russell's last episode of Doctor Who. She was a trailblazer. She was one of very few females in key positions in classic Doctor Who. But that's not to patronise her and say, well, that's a reason to choose her, but it's worth noting. It's worth talking about. She is, I think, one of the premier directors of classic Doctor Who. I mean, she does The Massacre, Invasion of the Dinosaurs, which, dinosaurs aside, is an excellent story. And Pyramids and Horror are just chef's kiss Doctor Who. So yeah, sorry, Ballad of Flannan Isle, although I love you. You're not a big enough moment, although you cast a shadow beautifully over it. You cast the shadow of the lighthouse back upon the previous 4 episodes. So it's beautifully done, and Tom Baker is the Doctor you want to be reading, the Ballad of Flannan Isle. I love it, but I love Paddy Russell, I think, just a little bit more, and I think feel duty-bound for Paddy Russell to be my bonus thing, and for Skinsale's death / the fact that everyone dies, which I know is a slightly cheeky thing to evoke for my thing for episode 4. But I want to give myself a chance to win. And wouldn't it be good if I was able to win whilst surviving, which most people don't, the 4 episodes of the horror of Fang Rock. Not the horror of Fang Rock. Martin Geraghty is going to tell us his favourite thing about episode 4 and his bonus.
And on to part 4. After the plot has been resolved and the Routons have been sent packing, the episode ends with Tom reciting the Ballad of Flannan Isle by Wilfred Gibson, or a part of it anyway, which very neatly and spookily rounds the story off. And you do tend to wonder what on earth the rescue party are going to make of all the carnage they find in the lighthouse when they eventually go to investigate various unexplained deaths and dead bodies scattered about the place. So in summary then, for me, Fang Rock is quintessential Doctor Who comfort viewing, if a story where everyone else dies can be considered comfort viewing. It's tense, scary, well acted, brilliantly plotted, and utilises the BBC's design department to great effect. Tom and Louise in particular are superb in it. Leela has so many great moments, disrobing in front of Vince. "I am no lady, Vince," she says, which is brilliant. Slapping Adelaide when she gets hysterical, which she does a lot. And gloating at the dying Rutan as it slips down the stairwell like a smashed egg. It's a wonderful story, and as ever, it's been a pleasure to revisit it.
So was Martin's bonus thing, to me, it sounded like the Doctor and Leela. I don't know if he explicitly stated a bonus thing there. So maybe this time, because last time I thought Jess Jerkovic hadn't done a bonus thing, and he had. I think this time maybe. But from what Martin was saying there, I think that, the Doctor and Leela may be his bonus thing, which I suggested in episode 1. But, of course, I rejected the Ballad of Flannan Isle in favour of Paddy Russell. So I lost. I fell at the final hurdle, but I did so doing the right thing. I did so by going with my heart. But nothing encapsulates more what I presaged the whole thing with by going, I usually screw up frustratingly at the last minute, and I mean frustratingly not just because I chose the wrong thing, but because I actually chose the right thing, and then at the very last minute unchose it and chose something else instead. Story of my life. But at least it's only a podcast and it doesn't really matter, because it's not the winning, it's the taking part. I think that's going to go on my tombstone. Here lies Toby Hadoke. It's not the winning, it's the taking part. And he took a part in a lot and never won anything. But the winner here is Horror of Fang Rock. It's a brilliant story. I like the fact that Martin and I were kind of on, we're pretty much in the same environs with the things that we enjoyed. Although interesting because he's a cartoonist. He's got a great way with words there, hasn't he? I liked him describing the Rutan falling down like a slippery smashed egg or whatever, and he described a few things in some of his other choices with a lovely turn of phrase. So he's been a delightful guest as Martin, who is a very, very nice chap. Check his work out online. I think you could buy some of his work online, his Doctor Who comic strip stuff, and of course, give him a salute when you watch the Doctor Who animations and when you see his work in Doctor Who magazine. He's an important contributor to the surrounding universe of Doctor Who, and a very nice fella to boot, and a great guest for Happy Times and Places. So it turns out I didn't have to hunt very high or very low to find the life at the heart of this podcast, which has I think ended on perhaps a slightly more positive note than the story that houses it, where nobody makes it out alive, but we all have, and we live to podcast another day. So I'm going to go and walk Bernard the dog before it gets dark. My other half's not here, so I'm going to take Bernard out, and what I will do is I will leave a door ajar, an untouched meal, and an over-toppled chair. Well, thank you ever so much for listening to this omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places, which was presented by me, Toby Hadoke, with my special guest, Martin Geraghty, who is not on social media, so just buy his stuff. He's prolific. I'm grateful to Martin, who's a lovely fellow, and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible. And they include Ruben Herfindahl, Peter Burns, James Curray-Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Stephen Moffat, not that one, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Tim Arding, Nigel Bromley, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Chamberlain, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford-Kelk, Paul Dunn, El Pandras, Susie Ferguson, Jason Gorman, Siobhan Galichon, Paul Harris, Chris Hyam, Ian Key, Ashley Knight, Joe Llewellyn, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin, Roland Moore, Rick Moran, Kevin Murdoch, Graham Knott, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto, Matty Sorillo, and Frank Shales. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like your name to be read out on the credits, like that with increasing desperation as the theme tune comes to an end, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, because the name calling is just one of the many benefits of being a patron, where for as little as £3 a month you get advance releases, these Happy Times and Places. They're not quite 6 months ahead now, but that's the intention. I'm hoping to get back to there, and Too Much Information is a few episodes ahead, and Indefinable Magic usually a few episodes ahead as well. I don't really have a plan, but I try. And you also get bonus material and exclusive content, some of it involving behind the scenes of the DVD and Blu-ray releases. You can also support these by going to Podbean, Spotify, and particularly Apple Podcast and iTunes and those places where people hang around looking for what podcasts to listen to, where a like, a subscribe, 5-star rating and a few lines of review really help to separate these from the very crowded, the jungle that is the world of Doctor Who and TV-related podcasts. So anything that you can do to help, and also if you can go to YouTube, where these now upload automatically as well, just as, they're audio only but have a placeholder graphic. But again, a bit of a comment, a thumbs up, a subscription to my Toby Hadoke YouTube channel really, really does help. I'm also on Instagram at toby.hadoke, where I put pictures and videos and also stuff about my comedy club, which is called Excess Malarkey, which you can find at Excess Malarkey on Twitter, also on Instagram as well, and both Excess Malarkey and I have Facebook pages too, so it would be great if you could avail yourself of some or all of those. Another way to support my endeavours is to go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke, where you can do a one-off donation if you are able or willing. But if not, please just carry on listening, and I'm very grateful to you for doing so. And I'm even more grateful, actually, if you're still listening at this point, as we approach the 3-hour mark, and it is after the closing credits, so we are getting, a little bit post crossroads meaningful moment, aren't we? But actually less. I don't leave anything of value till this point. This is value. I mean, you don't need me to tell you. You've probably reached that conclusion already. This is devoid of value. But there we are. But yes, any support you can give on any areas of social media and any way you can help to promote these, even if it's just by telling your friends, then I will be extremely grateful. Thanks so much. It's funny though, isn't it? It's because since I recorded this, and I remember having a great time doing so, I do love horror Fang rock. I'm sure you've picked that up over the past 3 hours, but that's what this podcast is all about. But since doing this, I'm pretty certain I've had a bit more involvement with horror Fang rock. I've actually met Vince and Adelaide because they were there at the BFI when season 15 was launched on Blu-ray, and they showed horror Fang rock, and I watched it all out. I went and went, I won't bother to watch it. I'll go and chat to people in the bar. I watched the whole thing, and I loved it. And there was a round of applause when Adelaide got slapped. I think there might have been one when she was killed as well. But Annette Woolett, who played Adelaide, she's now called Lucy Maxwell, took it. I think she was then as well. But anyway, yes, she took it in great spirits. She had a laugh about it. She was very, very jolly, which I was pleased to hear. And I managed to get a chat with both her and with John Abbott, which I was very, very happy about. And Louise Jameson was there as well, of course. But I've spent a lot of time with Louise talking about horror Fang rock because since this was recorded, I spent some time on a lighthouse with her making a documentary that is now out about the making of horror Fang rock. And also on that Blu-ray, I did a slightly less comfortable experience, which was doing a commentary with Tom Baker over Zoom on a couple of episodes. That was tricky, if I'm honest, but it was useful stuff because we did a whole load of commentaries in that session, and I think as we went on, we built up a rapport, and I think some of the later commentaries that we did, so there's one on Invasion of Time, which is also out on that season 15 box set, which I think is much better, and that's as a result of I think him testing me a little bit on horror Fang rock. Seems to be the one where he sees how far he could push things. And then we did some for other stories for box sets as yet unreleased, where I think we got some pretty good results. So it's all building blocks. And I'm also on Behind the Sofa watching horror. So I've done everything. I've done commentaries. I've done a commentary. I've done a documentary. I've done a Behind the Sofa, and I've done a Happy Times and Places. All I need to do now is read the audiobook. I'm sure that's already been done. But it's one of the first books. I've talked to you about the book probably over the past 3 hours. But yeah, I think and yet I'm not bored. I mean, I can easily find myself watching horror of Fang rock again. So, but I think I've pretty much covered all the bases of Fang rock. I know Fang rock like the back of my hand, and what a lucky boy I am. And on my Patreon, actually, there's some behind-the-scenes pictures and videos of the making of that documentary with Louise that was directed by Chris Chapman, where we did stay in a lighthouse. So These Blu-ray box sets really are the gift that keeps on giving. So I hope that's a little bit of a fresh perspective at the end here for those of you that listened to this in episode form, because I always re-record the opening and closing bits of these when they come out on Omnibus. Why? Because I'm a glutton for punishment, and I feel at least like it shows that I do try and put in some effort to everything I do, even if it's repackaging something I did several years ago. But and have since since had more experience of and more stories to tell about. But I think in fact, one bit Chris Chapman cut out of it. He sent me what was pretty much the final cut, and one of the crew from Pebble Mill told an anecdote about working on a comedy in the North. I don't think I tell this in the commentary because I'm pretty sure. Sorry, the years get lost on me, but I'm pretty sure I hadn't done any of that when I did Fang Rock for this. So one of the crew on Pebble Mill says in the documentary for Chris, and I was working on this comedy in the North, and this bloke, when he found out that I'd worked on Doctor Who or worked at Pebble Mill, he said, "Oh, you worked on Horror Fang Rock, blah, 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 blah." And I said to Chris, "Oh, that's really funny because that bloke he's talking about on the comedy he worked on in the North was me." And so, but then Chris cut it. So we'll never have that bit. So I'll never have that anecdote, even though I now have that anecdote, which I've told you at the end of this. So that anecdote from that guy from Horror Fang Rock, who was the crew of Horror Fang Rock, that you don't hear in the Lighthouse documentary on the season 15 box set, that anecdote that was cut from that is an anecdote that's about me, just in case I'm not all over that box set enough as it is. Gosh, yeah. Saying that, I'm not surprised if people are a bit fed up with me. I hope you're not. I hope you're not fed up with me, having listened to. I mean, if you've just reached the tipping point at 3 hours 5 minutes and 5 seconds, then I think that's fair enough. I think I've tested you and tested you enough, and perhaps like everybody else who is an inhabitant of Fang Rock, I perhaps too should be at this point killed off.